Chapter 1341. Even a man of steel had his moments of tenderness. How could a king be heartless? Ouyang Shuo could stand up without hesitation and show off his dominance. The only thing he could not face was the worry of his family and the separation from his two children. Nothing could be more cruel than this. Song Jia understood her husband very well. Before going to sleep, she whispered, "Don't worry. Our children and I will wait for you." She believed that her husband would definitely be able to turn misfortune into fortune and create another legend. "I look forward to the day you bring us to Hope Planet in a grand manner," Song Jia said. Ouyang Shuo did not say anything, nor did he make any promises. He just tightened his grip on his wife's hand. With a wife like this, what more could a husband ask for? The night was quiet. In the blink of an eye, the 9 years of Gaia were coming to an end. Winter once again descended on the earth. The entire world was silent. This winter was colder than the previous years. The destruction of Hope City was like a huge mountain that pressed down on all of humanity. During this period, the Gangder dynasty, the Gaul dynasty, and the Germanic dynasty expressed their approval of the Xia kingdom. Only the Dawson dynasty had yet to express their stance. From the looks of it, it was only a matter of time before Jack expressed his stance. The reason why he had not expressed his stance yet was probably because there was still half a year before the deadline given by Gaia. Jack did not want the Xia kingdom to take advantage of him. The Silver Hand and the Azure Badge must be using this opportunity to continue to build momentum. The direction of public opinion was already moving in the direction they expected. Ouyang Shuo, the strongest emperor who rose from the wilderness, was being molded into a global leader. Ouyang Shuo was being deified. Regarding this, there were many discussions in the Xia kingdom. Some were in favor, some were against, some were silent, and some were clamoring. All kinds of life could be seen in one city and one place, making people speechless. As the center of the whirlpool, the palace was solemn, but it was frighteningly silent. It was like a giant hibernating beast, sleeping silently as if it did not care about the disturbances of the outside world. Even the important officials of the imperial court kept their mouths shut, which was rare. The tacit approval of the Xia kingdom encouraged the arrogance of the Silver Hand and the Azure Badge. They spared no effort in advertising. Ouyang Shuo's prestige grew day by day. Before this, the global battlefields, including India, stopped uniformly, whether it was because of the cold winter or other reasons. The world once again became silent, as if night had fallen. December 15th, the capital. As the end of the year approached, Ouyang Shuo became even busier. There were many occasions that required his attendance, many summaries required his approval, and many important matters required his final decision. Meetings were held one after another, and inspections were carried out one after another. While he was busy, he seemed to have temporarily forgotten about the troubles of Hope Planet. No matter what, life had to go on. Ouyang Shuo had recently been planning the second batch of names to make preparations for the upcoming expedition. Naturally, he had put in a lot of thought into who to choose and who to keep. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Ouyang Shuo was reading the memorials in the imperial study. Suddenly, Ouyang Shuo's face froze, revealing a surprised and complicated expression. He then shouted towards the door, "Someone come. Here." The Divine Martial Guard captain on duty walked in. "Summon the Emperor. From now on, without our summons, no one is allowed to approach the imperial study." Ouyang Shuo gave a rare order to clear the area. The captain's eyes froze, but he didn't dare to argue. He only said, "Yes, Your Majesty. The Divine Martial Guard will be on guard in the surroundings. If Your Majesty has any orders, please come at any time." Ouyang Shuo nodded and waved his hand to dismiss him. Retreating together with them were the female officials who served as scouts in the imperial study, as well as the scholars of the Pavilion of Secret Texts on duty. Soon, only Ouyang Shuo was left in the large imperial study. Even the doors and windows were closed, completely blocking the prying gazes of outsiders. No one knew what was going on in the imperial study. In the blink of an eye, after the imperial study was cleared, a goddess dressed in palace attire appeared in front of Ouyang Shuo. She had a flawless face and a golden ratio attire. There was not a single blemish. Even the creator would be in awe of him. The only flaw was that the goddess' eyes were as calm as an abyss, cold and emotionless. This is Gaia. Outsiders would find it hard to imagine that Gaia would take the initiative to visit a player. Even Ouyang Shuo seemed to be slightly surprised and said with a bitter smile, "I never expected that you would come." Gaia didn't say anything. He waved his right hand, and a chair appeared out of thin air. Gaia sat on the chair and looked at Ouyang Shuo at eye level. He said, "Some things are best discussed face to face." Ouyang Shuo fell silent. He roughly guessed Gaia's purpose for coming here. Others might not know Ouyang Shuo's decision, but as the god of games, Gaia definitely knew. "I'm duty-bound." Ouyang Shuo didn't hide it. "That's good," Gaia said, and suddenly fiddled with his hair. That moment of grace made Ouyang Shuo a little dazed. The temptation of a god was not something that ordinary people could resist. "Even if you don't take the initiative to go, I will let you go," Gaia said. Ouyang Shuo smiled bitterly. "You think too highly of me." Gaia said, "You are the child of destiny. Just like you said, this is your destiny that you can't avoid." Ouyang Shuo's eyes focused, and his heart skipped a beat. His palms were covered in a layer of sweat, which was rare. It was as if the deepest secret hidden in his heart had suddenly been revealed. He was a little panicked, but there was also a hint of indescribable excitement. "I don't understand what you mean." Ouyang Shuo forced himself to calm down and stared at Gaia with a burning gaze. Under his seemingly calm appearance, there was already a hidden energy like a volcano that could erupt at any time. Ouyang Shuo's cultivation of the 5 Emperor's true scriptures had obviously reached an extremely profound level. Even in the entire Great Xia, there were only a few people who could compare to Ouyang Shuo in terms of individual strength. He was low-key and reserved, but it didn't mean that he didn't have explosive power. On the contrary, the heavy administrative work, the incessant scheming and planning did not disrupt Ouyang Shuo's cultivation plan. Ouyang Shuo's persistence on the path of martial arts often made Song Jia blush with shame. In fact, even if Ouyang Shuo didn't have any guards to protect him, it would be very difficult to hurt him in the wilderness. But Ouyang Shuo didn't show it all. This was one of Ouyang Shuo's biggest trump cards. According to Ouyang Shuo's calculations, he was confident that he could even fight against a titan, let alone an ordinary feral beast. Although he couldn't say that he could win, it was still possible for him to remain undefeated. This was also one of the reasons why Ouyang Shuo was so determined to go to Planet Hope. If he didn't have a few tricks up his sleeves, he wouldn't dare to go there. If there were experts here, they would definitely notice that the current imperial study was no longer shrouded by a mysterious aura. This meant that Ouyang Shuo's cultivation had already reached an extremely profound level. This also showed how vigilant Ouyang Shuo was at this moment. Gaia, who was sitting opposite him, suddenly smiled and said with satisfaction, "Your cultivation is not bad, but it's useless against me." Chapter 1342. Ouyang Shuo was disappointed. In the game world, Gaia was a true god. Everyone was powerless in front of her. Ouyang Shuo's vigilance was naturally very weak. "Tell me, what do you know?" Ouyang Shuo gave up resisting. Gaia was very straightforward. "Do you want to know the secret of your rebirth?" Ouyang Shuo's heart skipped a beat again. As expected, his biggest secret, a secret that even Song Jia and Binger didn't know, was actually known by Gaia. At this moment, Ouyang Shuo even felt that it was a little unreal. The secret that was hidden in the depths of his heart, a secret that no one could tell him, was easily exposed by Gaia. Ouyang Shuo's defense was immediately broken, and he seemed to be at a loss. In fact, Ouyang Shuo was really curious. He still couldn't understand why an ordinary reincarnation would become an unbelievable rebirth. "Speak." Ouyang Shuo calmed down. As early as 3 years ago, the advantage of being reborn was already negligible to Ouyang Shuo. Ouyang Shuo also didn't expect that this secret would be revealed one day. Since Gaia took the initiative to visit, she wouldn't have any evil intentions towards Ouyang Shuo. Uncovering this mystery was actually equivalent to untying the biggest knot in Ouyang Shuo's heart. Keeping such a secret was obviously not an easy task. More importantly, if rebirth could only be attributed to mysticism, then Ouyang Shua's current world would still be separated by a thin layer, unable to see the truth of the world. Perhaps the recent stagnation in his cultivation wasn't unrelated to this knot in his heart. It happened 4 years ago. Gaia began to narrate an unknown history. Ouyang Shua listened and was dumbfounded. On the day of your rebirth, the interstellar fleet was going through a very ordinary wormhole jump. Normally, in less than a second, the fleet would pass through the wormhole and appear in space hundreds of light years away. But an accident happened. During the jump, a time ripple suddenly appeared in the wormhole. Coincidentally, it hit the game cabin you were in. Space-time folded, bringing you to 5 years ago. When the fleet passed through the wormhole, the game cabin that had disappeared reappeared miraculously. What was even weirder was that, because of the space-time effect, the entire game world was remade and changed drastically. At that time, Ouyang Shua had already changed from a nameless adventurer to the ruler of Great Xia, causing chaos in the Huaxia region and even the entire game world. From then on, the entire world was completely different. Ouyang Shua asked, "Do you mean that in the 5 years I spent in Gaia, in that short second, I had actually experienced a reincarnation in the spatial tunnel?" "You can understand it that way." Gaia nodded. "After that, I checked the surveillance footage and accidentally discovered that your game capsule had disappeared for a second. That's how I came to this conclusion." "Wait, what you said just now is a guess." Ouyang Shua suddenly felt that something was wrong. His eyes opened wide as he asked in disbelief. "In other words, you're actually unable to confirm that I've been reborn once?" "No, I've already confirmed it." Gaia was very calm, but Ouyang Shua was so angry that he vomited blood. He never expected that his life of scheming would end up in Gaia's hands. He had been tricked by Gaia. This goddess was a little out of character. Although he was angry, Ouyang Shua still heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. The so-called rebirth was actually a space-time travel. It could be completely explained by science. It wasn't some mysticism, nor was it some metaphysical thing. The world before him, be it the game or reality, was extremely real. At that moment, Ouyang Shua's mind became clear once again. He looked up and sensed the world. It was as though the invisible barrier from before had suddenly disappeared. The world became clear. Great! Ouyang Shua revealed a rare smile and no longer cared about Gaia's tricks. His state of mind was unprecedentedly good. "Thank you." Looking at Gaia opposite him, Ouyang Shua sincerely thanked her. If not for Gaia's explanation, he was afraid that he would have to live with this secret for the rest of his life. Gaia said, "I'm a Homo sapiens. I've never believed in fate. But since that time Ripple coincidentally chose you, I'm still somewhat looking forward to it." Ouyang Shua nodded in agreement. Sometimes the world was just so wonderful. If one were to read history and look back, they would discover that some of the major inventions or major historical events in history would often originate from a seemingly insignificant matter. Then they would flap the wings of a butterfly and ultimately change the flow of the river of history. Ouyang Shua's rebirth, this time, was essentially the same as those major events. It wasn't anything special. Fortunately, I didn't waste this opportunity. Ouyang Shua was very confident. Not all rebirths could create miracles. Even if an ordinary person was given a chance to be reborn, he or she might not be able to do anything earth-shattering. The final outcome would probably still be very miserable. Ouyang Shua's luck didn't bring shame to the reborn. Gaia nodded. Obviously, he agreed with this. "Let's talk about going to Hope Planet." Gaia started talking about another matter. Ouyang Shua's expression turned solemn. He knew that this was the real topic. Otherwise, Gaia wouldn't be so bored as to specially come over to explain the secret of rebirth to him. To Gaia, the past didn't have much meaning. The development of Planet Hope concerned the future and destiny of mankind. It was also Gaia's highest mission. This was the most important thing that Gaia had in front of him. "This time, I'll allocate 2 starships to you for the development of Planet Hope. The relevant resources will also be prepared for you as much as possible." "What other requests do you have?" "Just say them all." Gaia said. When Ouyang Shuo heard this, he didn't know what to say for a moment. To be honest, his mind was in a mess. He still hadn't sorted out an accurate train of thought. He really didn't know what to say when Ouyang Shuo suddenly made a request. Can you give me a batch of the spots to materialize Homo sapiens for free? Ouyang Shuo asked. Materializing a Homo sapiens required 500,000 achievement points. Even if Ouyang Shuo had close to 100 million achievement points, he couldn't afford such a consumption. Moreover, how could he maintain his clearance level if he used up all of them? It seemed that he couldn't have his cake and eat it too. Gaia was very decisive. I can give you 10 spots. Any more and you'll exceed your clearance. Homo sapiens didn't materialize out of thin air. It required a lot of precious resources, and Gaia couldn't afford it. The spots will be given to you through rewards when Grand Xia becomes an imperial dynasty. Gaia still had to go through the procedures. Even the god of games couldn't do whatever he wanted. Everything had to follow the rules of the game world, and Gaia couldn't break it. Chapter 1343. What about the mecha manufacturing technology and materialization technology? Can we share them? Ouyang Shuo asked. Ambition. Ouyang Shuo did not conceal his ambition to escape Gaia's control. With these two key technologies, even without Gaia's support, Ouyang Shuo would be able to build an extremely luxurious team, completely free from the limitations of achievement points. Ordinary people abided by the rules, but emperors were used to subverting them. Ouyang Shuo was looking forward to the day when he could establish the Order of Planet Hope on his own. Don't beat around the bush when you talk to Gaia. Just like now, Gaia clearly understood Ouyang Shuo's ambition. As long as it was harmless to humans, she wouldn't care. Gaia followed the rules. Sharing for free won't do. According to the plan, an exchange system would be established between the base and the resource planets in the future. The base uses biological resources to exchange for resource planet technology and products, Gaia explained. Gaia had obviously come up with a complete set of plans with his supercomputing abilities. Ouyang Shuo even guessed that Gaia's decision to have the interstellar fleet dock on a resource planet was not a spur-of-the-moment idea. Instead, it was a backup plan that had been in place a long time ago. Predicting the worst-case scenario and making contingency plans were the forte of a top-notch artificial intelligence like Gaia. Ouyang Shuo's eyes narrowed. So you're saying that in the future, the relationship between the base and the interstellar fleets won't be one of superior and subordinate, but more like a cooperative model, each taking what they need? If that was the case, the base would have a lot of autonomy. As for the equivalent exchange that Gaia mentioned, it was also a cooperative model that Ouyang Shuo highly recommended. It was not Ouyang Shuo's style to expect a free lunch and take advantage of others. You can understand it that way. After the disbanding of the Federation, Gaia took on the role of a guardian of humanity and did not seek leadership. Ouyang Shuo took a long look at Gaia and asked the question in his heart. So, if nothing happens to the base, you don't plan to step on a Hope planet? You're very smart. A ripple finally appeared in Gaia's eyes. She did not hide it from Ouyang Shuo and said what Ouyang Shuo did not say. Resource planets are not suitable for human survival, but for Homo sapiens, there is no problem. Gaia was already preparing to turn the resource planet into the home planet of the Homo sapiens. That way, humans would settle on Hope planet and Homo sapiens would settle on resource planet. They would complement each other and not interfere with each other, forming a beneficial symbiotic relationship. Perhaps this was the way out that Gaia had found for Homo sapiens. Ouyang Shuo sighed inwardly. Perhaps this was the best outcome for both sides. Not all humans could treat NPCs the same way he did. The hostility of the species could never be eradicated. Can you do me a small favor? Ouyang Shuo asked in the end. His tone wasn't one of routine business, and it was more like a request between friends, and it carried a trace of warmth. Although the two of them did not meet often, they felt like old friends at first sight. Go ahead. Gaia gave a charming smile. Ouyang Shuo smiled and made his request. Gaia did not hesitate and immediately agreed. That's settled then. Gaia did not bother with pleasantries. He turned into a white light and disappeared from the imperial study together with his chair. No one knew that Gaia had been here before. This secret conversation would not be revealed until 200 years later. It became an extraordinary historic conversation between the leaders of the two planets, which would be recorded in history. December 20th. Soon after sending Gaia off, Ouyang Shuo began to deal with the aftermath of the battle in India. Due to the destruction of Hope City, the resistance of the Indian players toward Great Xia was greatly reduced. They helped the Great Xia army wipe out the remaining enemies and remove the last obstacle. After winter, the war was basically over. A few days ago, the Imperial Guards, the Dragon Stallion Army, the Southern Frontier Army, and the Western General, who had participated in the war, had already withdrawn from the front lines and returned to their respective garrisons. The defense of India was completely taken over by the South Asian theater of operations. According to the post-war statistics, after the destruction of the three Indian dynasties, there were still nearly 1 million prisoners of war waiting to be reorganized, in addition to replenishing the losses, arranging for the retirement of the wounded, and eliminating unqualified soldiers. Among them were 300,000 soldiers of the Peacock dynasty who had previously surrendered to the Ashoka dynasty. How ironic! These prisoners of war were all elites, and how to deal with them was a thorny matter. Arranging for them to be retired or transferred to civilian work was undoubtedly a huge waste and could easily cause hidden dangers to public security. After all, the size of this batch of prisoners of war was twice the size of the South Asian theater of operations. In view of this, with Ouyang Shuo's approval, the million prisoners of war were temporarily reorganized into 4 corps and temporarily given the designations of the South Asian First Army to the Fourth Army. The 4 corps were temporarily placed under the jurisdiction of the South Asian Theater of Operations and led by the Grand Council. The Imperial Court already had a preliminary plan on how to maximize the role of the 4 corps and use it where it needed to be carried out at the beginning of spring. What they needed to do now was to appease the emotions of the 4 corps and have a good rest. After the beginning of spring, this would be a destructive force that would help the Empire realize its new strategic ambitions. The 10th year of Gaia, the first day of the first month. Without the usual system update, the arrival of the 10th year of Gaia seemed somewhat quiet. At the beginning of the new year, the Imperial Court of the Great Xia issued a personnel appointment. The decree was to remove King Ouyang Bing from his position as a scholar of the Secret Text Pavilion and transfer her to the position of Honglu Vice Minister and Deputy Commander of the Jiangyi Theater of Operations, effective immediately. The experience in the Secret Text Pavilion had made Bing familiar with the internal affairs of the Empire. Seeing that there was not much time left, and Ouyang Shuo could not wait any longer, he could only let Bing step into the 2 major fields of diplomacy and military affairs to make the final preparations for the upcoming regent. The identity of Honglu Vice Minister gave Bing the opportunity to represent the Empire in global diplomacy and enhance his personal prestige. The position of Deputy Commander of the Jiangyi Theater of Operations was even more important. In the future, Ouyang Shuo was prepared to hand over the Jiangyi Theater of Operations to Bing. Only with military power could Bing have a stable position as the regent. Otherwise, Ouyang Shuo would not be able to head to Planet Hope with peace of mind. The last insurance was Gaia's protection of Bing. Other than the official appointment, Bing also served as the deputy commander of the Mountain Sea Guards and began to come into contact with the intelligence network. It was unprecedented for Bing to have 3 jobs at the same time, involving military, diplomatic, and intelligence. The 10th year of Gaia was a very crucial year for Bing. In the blink of an eye, it was already March. There were only 3 months left to the deadline given by Gaia. With the silver hand and the azure emblem adding fuel to the fire, Ouyang Shuo's expedition to Planet Hope was almost a done deal. The wave of public opinion had already formed. All that was left was the final blow. He believed that the Dawson Empire would soon express its approval of the Great Xia and give the Great Xia the position of sovereign. Before this, whether it was the European battlefield or the African battlefield, there was a rare silence. It was so calm that it was unbelievable. Under the calm, a storm was quietly brewing. Chapter 1344. The 10th Year of Gaia, March 5th. What was surprising was that the first battle in the Decade of Gaia did not happen in Europe, but in Asia. On that day, Great Xia officially declared war on the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire had a vast territory, with a total of around 30 million players. Even after the Mongolian Empire's westward expedition, the empire's total army was still around 2 million. On top of that, the Persian Gulf was once seen as a rising empire in Asia. Furthermore, apart from a war with the Mongolian Empire, the Persian Empire rarely participated in foreign wars. It was stable internally, prosperous in trade, and relatively developed in industry. It was the last significant opponent of Great Xia in Asia. Before attacking India, Ouyang Shua had not thought about whether to declare war on the Persian Empire. The smooth progress of the battle in India had not only won another heavyweight protectorate for Great Xia, but they had also accumulated 1 million elite troops. This gave Ouyang Shua the confidence to wage war against Persia. His status as the hegemon of Asia also helped him in this battle. In order to take down the Persian Empire as soon as possible, Ouyang Shua wasn't careless at all this time. He mobilized the upper, middle, and lower armies, a total of 31 legions, 1,550,000 soldiers. The upper army consisted of the 4 corps of the Fengxiang army, which belonged to the North Asian war zone. They marched from the North Pagoda Pass of the Western Frontier Province. The commander of the Fengxiang army, General Guizi, was appointed as the commander of the upper army. The Central Army consisted of 4 legions of the Flying Bear Army and 3 legions of the Western Army, which belonged to the West Asia Theater of Operations, and 3 legions of the Western Army. They marched from the Southern Pass of the Western Frontier Province. Divine General Wang Jian was appointed as the commander of the Central Army. The Lower Army consisted of South Asia's 1st Army to the 4th Army, totaling 1 million soldiers. They were also the main force of the expedition against the Persian Empire, and they set off from Ashoka Province. Divine General Li Jing personally led the expedition. In addition, the Indian Ocean Fleet would also launch an attack on the coastal areas of the Persian Empire from the sea. After defeating an enemy, they would use the country's military strength to attack the next target. This method was very similar to the meat grinder plan that Jia Su had proposed on the battlefield of Tubo. It could also be considered as creating a model for Great Xia. If things went smoothly, the model could continue to operate. The foundation of this operation was thanks to Great Xia's success in the Tianju battlefield. It was precisely by relying on unconventional tactics like the Imperial Death Talisman that the Great Xia army was able to achieve an easy victory. If they continued to fight head-on with the Ashoka dynasty, it would only be a Pyrrhic victory. The Xia kingdom's sudden declaration of war was undoubtedly an unacceptable disaster for the Persian Empire. Even though the Persian Empire had 2 million soldiers, it was very difficult for them to find an opportunity to win against the 3 armies of Great Xia. The internal stability of the Persian Empire was both an advantage and a great disadvantage. Among the 2 million soldiers, more than half of them were reorganized by the imperial guards of various countries. They had basically never experienced any wars, so their actual combat ability was really worrying. Otherwise, the Mongol Empire wouldn't have been able to beat the Persian Empire so badly. As compared to the Mongolian cavalry, the Great Xia army was much stronger. The 1.5 million soldiers of Great Xia were equivalent to at least 3 million soldiers of the Persian Empire, or even more if they were to convert their combat power into one. How could the Persian Empire win? The only way was to ask for help from their allies. There were 3 dynasties that bordered the Persian Empire and belonged to the Silverhands camp. They were the Arab Empire, the Caesar dynasty, and the Romanov dynasty. The Caesar dynasty and the Romanov dynasty were trapped in the European battlefield. They were still hoping for the Persian Empire to send reinforcements. They did not have the energy to help the Persian Empire. In particular, the Romanov dynasty was busy attacking the Germanic Empire. The sparsely populated Far East region bordering the Persian Empire was lacking in support. The most likely candidate was the Arab Empire. The two empires had the same origin, but because of different beliefs, they were divided into two empires. At that time, their relationship wasn't very friendly. It was really unknown whether the Arab Empire could lend a helping hand. Needless to say, the Arab Empire also had to face the direct threat of Great Xia in the African theater. After thinking about it, the Persian Empire could only face the battle alone. Great Xia's declaration of war against Persia was like a nuclear bomb that stirred up the calm global situation. It wasn't just the Persian Empire who was the victim. Other people didn't expect that Great Xia, which was deeply involved in the whirlpool of public opinion, would continue to expand and continue its path of hegemony in the game world. It seemed that the destruction of Hope City didn't have any impact on Great Xia's strategic decision. This naturally became a reason for the Silver Hand to attack Great Xia. The problem was that the Silver Hand and the Azure Badge were trying to create a great and righteous image of Ouyang Shua. If they stood up to accuse Ouyang Shua at this time, all their previous efforts would be wasted. Therefore, they could only remain silent and swallow their pride. I'm starting to suspect that Ouyang Shua saw this subtle opportunity, which is why he wantonly started the war. Jack, who was on the other side of the ocean, couldn't help but sigh. It wasn't that Jack didn't know the strategic position of the Persian Empire, nor did he not know how valuable the oil and gas resources of the Persian Gulf were. However, in the face of the Persian Empire's request for help, the Dawson dynasty was really helpless. After taking down India, Great Xia's strategic depth was terrifying. Their overall strength had risen to a new level, and it was really not something that the Dawson dynasty could contend with head-on. This was also one of the reasons why the Silver Hand was so anxious to send away the god of plague, Ouyang Shua. Although there were rumors that Ouyang Shua was trying his best to train a successor, Jack was still very confident in dealing with a little girl like Ouyang Bing. Great Xia's declaration of war also caused the temporarily cooled-down global battlefield to be reactivated. Ordinary players couldn't understand the hidden meaning behind Great Xia's declaration of war, but the lords were very clear about it. In a sense, with the destruction of Hope City and the obstruction of human settlement on Hope, the status of the game world didn't decline, but instead rose, becoming a real second world. In the foreseeable future, the majority of human beings would continue to live in the game world. Therefore, the fight for dominance in the game world had become even more important than before, even surpassing the fight for the 3 spots. This was a move to divide the cake, and the most important thing was to not fall behind. Precisely because of this, Ouyang Shua could ignore the public opinion of the outside world and brazenly declare war on the Persian Empire not long after the Indian War had ended. This was the source of the internal logic. If they could defeat the Persian Empire and completely control the oil and gas resources of the Persian Gulf, in a future wave of industrial competition, Great Xia would basically be invincible. The current Ouyang Shua was like a father who was about to go on a long journey. He always wanted to do his best before he left, so as to leave behind a solid family business for his successor, Binger. Otherwise, even if he left, he wouldn't feel at ease. Chapter 1345. Great Xia's disruption made the feudal lords, who were still in a daze, wake up. They temporarily forgot about Plan of Hope and put in more effort to start the war of annexation in the game world. The first to bear the brunt was the European battlefield. The Germanic dynasty continued to use the remaining troops to restrain the Ganger dynasty, and at the same time, increase the intensity of their attack on the Gaul dynasty. They had to fight it out. There were also rumors that King Henry of Gaul, who was about to collapse under the pressure, had already had a secret conversation with King Manstein of the Germanic dynasty. The two dynasties seemed to be looking for a way to resolve the dispute to avoid both sides suffering losses. According to the Black Snake Guards, the prime minister of the Germanic dynasty, the famous prime minister of Iron and Blood, Bismarck, was recently having a secret meeting with the prime minister of the Gaul dynasty, Richelieu. Both prime ministers were god-level talents. All signs indicated that the European continent was about to usher in a major change. The Romanov dynasty did not want to be outdone. Taking advantage of the Germanic dynasty's preoccupation, They wantonly occupied the northern territory of the Germanic dynasty and expanded the strategic depth of the capital, St. Petersburg. As for the Caesar dynasty, it was difficult for them to do anything big. Year 10 of Gaia, 10th of March, Jingshur. The War of Persia had already broken out. One after another, the field army crossed the border and brazenly charged into Persia, setting off a war of the century that would affect the new structure of Asia. Massive amounts of rations and supplies were also continuously being transported to the front line. The abundant rations and supplies in the South Asian Protectorate ensured the logistics of this war, allowing millions of troops to enter the war without any worries. Facing the attack of Great Xia, the Persian king issued a war mobilization order, and at the same time issued a level 1 war readiness order, saying that they would use the power of the country to resist the invasion of Great Xia. The Persian king even shouted the slogan, "Defend my country, protect my home," to boost morale. What made people helpless was that because of the destruction of the City of Hope, Ouyang Shua's popularity among the players exploded, and some people made him the best candidate to open up Planet Hope. Therefore, the Persian players were unusually passive in this war. If Ouyang Shua really took the initiative to open up Planet Hope, he would be the savior of mankind, a great hero, and Great Xia would fully deserve to be the overlord of the world. Merging with Great Xia would not be so unacceptable. It was not difficult to understand why the Persian players chose to watch from the sidelines. The passive response of the Persian players caused the Persian army to lose their convenient communication network, and their scouting ability was greatly reduced. When faced with the attack of the Great Xia army, they became increasingly powerless. The scales of the war tilted in favor of the Great Xia from the very beginning. At this moment, the Great Xia army, which had conquered India, was in high spirits. With the momentum of a great victory, they had the attitude of the hegemon of Asia and were moving unhindered within Persia's borders, seizing cities and seizing territory. Wherever the army went, blood flowed like rivers. Fresh blood dyed the Great Xia flag red, strengthening the might of the Great Xia army and forming an unstoppable momentum. Heaven and earth were shaking, and so were the enemies. The invincible image of the Great Xia army, which was invincible and all-conquering, was quietly spreading throughout the Persian Empire, further crumbling the will of the Persian army to resist. Perhaps, from the very beginning, this was an asymmetric war. Furthermore, Great Xia's Indian Ocean fleet had firmly sealed off the coast of the Persian Empire, causing the maritime trade of the Persian Empire to come to a standstill. Not a single merchant ship could enter or leave the port. This was undoubtedly a disaster for the Persian Empire that relied on imports. The Persian Empire was immediately plunged into internal and external troubles. Great Xia's attack on the Persian Empire was all-encompassing, causing the Persian Empire to be unable to resist at all. Defeat was only a matter of time. The development of the situation surprised even Ouyang Shua. Before this, he didn't realize that Great Xia had already become a global empire and the hegemon of the seas. Great Xia actually didn't feel the slightest bit of pressure when it came to conquering a medium-sized country like the Persian Empire. From this, it could be seen that in terms of overall national strength, military strength, and other aspects, Great Xia's strength had already far surpassed that of the other empires. Even the Dacian Empire found it hard to catch up to them. Perhaps, at the moment when India was conquered, the deterrence that Great Xia had accumulated around the world had already reached a peak, transforming into a superpower of the entire world. In the game, there was a new situation where one superpower had many strong players. This kind of outcome shouldn't simply be attributed to fate. Ouyang Shua was deep in thought. During the 10 years of Gaia, Great Xia's global plans weren't just limited to the Persian Empire. At the military and political conference before the new year, Ouyang Shua and the other ministers established a new round of strategy for Great Xia. It was a magnificent blueprint. Time was of the essence. Seeing that the resource planet was already in sight, Ouyang Shua's vision wouldn't just stop at the Persian battlefield. As long as there was a chance, the new plan would be implemented very quickly. In the 10 years of Gaia, it was time for this huge game of chess to be completely reeled in. With Great Xia's current development, it wouldn't take more than a month to prepare for a war. And once they attacked, it had to be decided in one battle. Hesitation or procrastination weren't the style of Great Xia. The Great Xia that Ouyang Shua had created was a ferocious beast. Once it locked onto its prey, it would strike. In comparison, the war in Europe that had dragged on until now was like a child's play. Even the initiator, Ouyang Shua, didn't expect that the war in Europe had dragged on until now without a decisive outcome. The Europeans were famous for being a troublemaker and petty bunch. Imperial Palace, Imperial Study. Has the information been confirmed? Ouyang Shua asked. Sitting opposite Ouyang Shua was the commander of the Black Snake Guards, Black Snake, who was in charge of overseas intelligence. Your Majesty, the information is absolutely true. The Gaul dynasty and the Germanic dynasty are going to regroup. The information revealed by Black Snake was enough to shock the world. As the information was too crucial, Black Snake didn't hesitate to personally rush to the base city to confirm the authenticity of the information before making a special trip back to report to His Majesty. Black Snake, who had always been in charge of overseas intelligence, was very clear about the weight of the information. Indeed, Ouyang Shua was very happy to receive Black Snake's confirmation. He was generous with his praise. The Black Snake Guards did a great job this time. After you leave, reward the men who obtained the information on my behalf. Thank you, Your Majesty. Black Snake bowed excitedly. It was an extremely great honor to receive His Majesty's praise. Of course, the Black Snake Guards were also worthy of such praise. Even a fool knew that the regrouping of the Gaul dynasty and the Germanic dynasty was a top secret. It was basically the top secret of the two dynasties. The Black Snake Guard could even investigate this kind of intelligence. It could be imagined to what extent this intelligence organization had developed after several years of operation. It was simply terrifying. So, the current war between the two countries is just an act. A playful smile appeared on Ouyang Shua's face. As expected of Henry, he's very sensible and knows when to advance and when to retreat. Knowing that he could not survive, Henry displayed the boldness that an emperor should have. He decisively broke away from the shackles of the Silver Hand and brazenly joined the Azure Badge's camp. In order to survive, Henry did not hesitate to change. Unlike the former king of Spain, Casillas, who was incessant and reluctant to give up, he was gradually nibbled away by Ouyang Shua and the Azure Badge like a frog in warm water. In the end, not even his bones were left. Ouyang Shua did not have to think to know what kind of fate Casillas, who was now living in the Gaul dynasty, would face after Henry joined the Germanic dynasty. Death was considered a light punishment. Unfortunately, Henry was a little late to adapt to the situation. If back then, Ouyang Shua sighed and did not continue. Previously, Ouyang Shua had also thought of roping Henry from the Silver Hand's camp to become a great help. If that was really the case, the situation in Europe would not be as complicated as it was today. At present, Henry finally gave up his so-called principles, gave up his fear of the Silver Hand, and joined the opponent's camp at the moment of life and death. How much capital could he gain? In the future Germanic dynasty, Henry might not have much room to play. So, who are they putting on this show for? Ouyang Shua's gaze seemed to be able to penetrate time and space and see the thrilling show that was playing on the European continent thousands of miles away. Seeing that His Majesty was in high spirits, the Black Snake replied, "It should be to plot against the Gangster army and the Spanish army that are still in the Gaul dynasty." Originally, it was not appropriate for the Black Snake to speak about such a military and national matter. Not all of them. Ouyang Shua shook his head and did not continue. What should be noted was that Ouyang Shua was still very well behaved. He would never wantonly discuss the empire's military operations in Europe in front of the Black Snake. Gathering information was the Black Snake's duty. Based on Ouyang Shua's understanding of Henry and Manstein, they had racked their brains to put on this big show together. Their appetite was not limited to nibbling away at the little army in the Gaul dynasty. Perhaps they had even greater ambitions. Think about it. After annexing the Gaul dynasty, the Germanic dynasty would be completely connected, and they would become the most powerful dynasty in Europe in one fell swoop, enough to compete with the remaining three dynasties. The danger of the Germanic dynasty's destruction had been eliminated at this time. Then, with the appetite and ambition of the Azure emblem, would they still be satisfied with the status quo? Absolutely not. Continuing to expand in Europe and even unifying the entire European continent was probably already on the agenda of the Azure emblem. If they could operate the entire European continent as their base camp, then it would be a beautiful turnaround for the Azure emblem. The position of the Azure emblem in the game world would become very solid. It's time to carry out the steel forging plan. Any delay will lead to changes. The information brought by the Black Snake gave Ouyang Shuo a sense of urgency. He realized that if he did not take action before the situation in Europe became clear, Great Xia would not be able to get a share of the pie in Europe. Since you guys want to put on a show, don't blame me for taking chestnuts out of the fire. Ouyang Shuo's gaze was distant. Chapter 1346. On the 12th of March, the Supreme Commander of the African Theater of Operations, the Logistics Support Center, the Phantom Army stationed in Africa, and the Atlantic Fleet received orders from the Imperial Court at the same time. Execute the steel forging plan immediately. The following week, the African Theater of Operations began to operate secretly to make the final preparations for the implementation of the steel forging plan that had been formulated last year. At this time, there didn't seem to be any obvious changes on the European continent. The Germanic dynasty was still fighting fiercely with the Gaul army, and the war in Europe seemed to be in a stalemate, giving the Romanov dynasty an advantage. Ouyang Shuo saw a different scene. Under the secret surveillance of the Black Snake Guards, he knew that the Germanic dynasty was quietly withdrawing from the front line in Gaul and moving north. The exchange of fire between the two sides was just an illusion. At this point, Manstein's goal was very obvious. He wanted to deal a fatal blow to the Romanov dynasty. Such a plan coincided with Great Xia's strategy. After receiving the intelligence, Ouyang Shuo couldn't help but reveal a trace of joy. The Germanic dynasty had really sent a beautiful assist to Great Xia. In contrast, the Persian battlefield was much more intense. Under the overwhelming offensive of the Great Xia army, the Persian Empire's territory was gradually falling into enemy hands. The dividing line between the two sides was like a deadly red coastline that constantly advanced from the east to the west. The situation of the war was getting clearer. Ouyang Shuo predicted that as long as the Great Xia army continued to exert pressure, the Persian king would be unable to hold on. If he didn't want to lose everything, it would be best for him to take the initiative to admit defeat. In that case, Ouyang Shuo could still consider arranging an official position for him. It wouldn't do anyone any good if he persisted. After all, Ouyang Shuo wasn't willing to destroy a country every time it was destroyed. If that was the case, it would be a laborious task and a considerable loss of national strength. Of course, if the Persian king surrendered, the Great Xia army wouldn't show any mercy. Ouyang Shuo even instructed the front line to fight in the glory of the Great Xia army. Not only did they have to frighten the enemy, but they also had to instill fear in the hearts of the Persian people. They had to beat the enemy until they were in pain and afraid. Only in this way could the empire govern Persia in the future without any setbacks. Many times, some blood had to be shed. Otherwise, it wouldn't form a brand and people wouldn't remember. When necessary, Ouyang Shuo could also shed blood. At the same time, the Silver Hand and Azure Emblem's public opinion finally reached its peak. This time, Ouyang Shuo had to go even if he didn't want to. When it came to guiding public opinion, the two organizations were truly masters. If it wasn't for Ouyang Shuo's original intention, and if it was someone else who wasn't willing, he might really be played to death just like this, sullenly becoming the scapegoat of the two organizations. March 20th. Seeing that there were only 2 months left until the deadline given by Gaia, Jack finally didn't want to drag things out any longer. He represented the Dawson dynasty, informally expressing their approval of the Grand Xia. At this point, the Great Xia dynasty had perfectly fulfilled the 3 requirements to become an imperial dynasty. Ouyang Shua didn't waste any time. He arrived at the main hall at 8 in the morning, opened his communication compass, and clicked on the application to become an imperial dynasty. As soon as he clicked on it, a series of system notifications flashed across the compass. System notification, detecting the requirements for the Grand Xia Empire to advance. Condition 1. Unify the Huaxia region. Fulfill the condition. Condition 2. Obtain the overlord status of the Asian region. Satisfy the requirements. Condition 3. Obtain the recognition of the entire world's dynasties. Fulfill the requirements. System notification. Detection complete. The Grand Xia Empire has fulfilled the requirements to advance to a Grand Empire. Do you wish to advance? As soon as Ouyang Shua clicked on the confirmation button, a strange phenomenon appeared in the sky. At the same time, a rainbow-colored ray of light, as thick as a millstone, rose from the Xia Palace. In an instant, it shot into the sky. Following that, clusters of rainbow-colored auspicious clouds appeared in the sky, mixed with rays of rainbow-colored auspicious lights. An auspicious sign descended from the sky. Interestingly, one of the rainbow-colored rays of light landed on the Persian battlefield. The great Xia army that was charging forward was bathed in the rainbow-colored auspicious lights. Their strength suddenly multiplied, and they were like heavenly soldiers and generals. They immediately defeated the Persian army. Seeing such a miracle, the Persian army was so frightened that they immediately surrendered. A ray of rainbow-colored light won a local battle for the great Xia, and it became a legend on the battlefield. This small interlude tilted the battlefield in favor of the great Xia, and it became the last straw that broke the Persian Empire's back. If nothing unexpected happened, the Persian king would soon surrender. Ouyang Shua's communication compass continued to pop up with system notifications. System notification. Congratulations to the great Xia for advancing to an imperial dynasty. The great Xia dollar has automatically become the global currency, and it can be freely circulated within the borders of all dynasties. With that, the great Xia dollar made another counterattack in the battle against the primordial Tao. If Jack knew that there were such benefits to advancing to an imperial dynasty, would he regret it so much that his intestines would turn green? This was a classic example of shooting oneself in the foot. System notification. Congratulations to the great Xia for advancing to an imperial dynasty. The global ports and markets of all dynasties will be freely open to the great Xia to acknowledge the great Xia's position as the overlord. With these 2 points, great Xia's dominant position in the global trade was basically guaranteed. Even the trade rules would be set by the great Xia. This established the economic foundation of the great Xia in the future, and it was basically in an invincible position. This was a pleasant surprise. Before this, no one knew that advancing to an imperial dynasty would have such benefits. Actually, it was understandable. After all, one of the prerequisites for advancing to an imperial dynasty was to obtain the recognition of all the dynasties in the world. Since that was the case, there would definitely be a series of tangible benefits. Otherwise, why would there be such a high difficulty requirement? If it wasn't for this freak accident, Ouyang Shu wouldn't have the confidence to send the great Xia to the throne of an imperial dynasty so quickly. This was Ouyang Shua's ultimate goal in the game world. Apart from this, there were also a series of benefits for advancing to an imperial dynasty. It could only be said that compared to a dynasty, an imperial dynasty indeed stood at the peak of the world. The significance was completely different, perhaps because it was too shocking, or perhaps because it was too symbolic. Gaia, who had already canceled the system announcement, immediately made an exception and once again made a system announcement. World announcement. Congratulations to China's player Ouyang Shua for successfully advancing the Great Xia dynasty to the Great Xia Imperial Dynasty, becoming the first ruler in the world to ascend to the throne. Special reward. 10 Homo sapiens, as well as permanent S-rank authority as a reward. Congratulations, Ouyang Shua. Congratulations to the Great Xia. As soon as the announcement was made, the entire world was in an uproar. The players of the entire world didn't expect that Ouyang Shua would be so straightforward. Without any preparations, he immediately applied for a promotion as soon as the Dawson dynasty made their announcement. This surprise came a bit too suddenly. Logically speaking, since the Great Xia was the first and perhaps only imperial dynasty in the entire game world to become an imperial dynasty, the Great Xia should at least make some grand preparations and hold a grand promotion ceremony. Ouyang Shuo had his own ideas. Firstly, the Great Xia was currently at war with Persia, and they were secretly preparing for another huge battle. Holding a promotion ceremony now seemed a bit inappropriate. Secondly, the Great Xia had already held 2 promotions, so there was no need to hold another one. Furthermore, with the current atmosphere, it was far from being a festive occasion. If the Great Xia were to hold a grand celebration now, it would give people the feeling that a villain was intoxicated by his success. It was better to keep a low profile. In this way, Ouyang Shuo was able to advance directly without making any preparations. Of course, although there was no promotion ceremony, there was still a pleasant surprise. After Gaia made the announcement, Ouyang Shuo logged into the forums and posted a message. From now on, I accept Gaia's invitation to lead the Great Xia team to Planet Hope. The moment the news came out, the entire world was in an uproar. If it was said that the players were just surprised before, then this time they were truly pleasantly surprised. Ouyang Shuo's declaration meant that at the moment of humanity's survival, there was finally someone who stood up and was prepared to turn the tide, to win a chance of survival for humanity. The players' hearts that were hanging in suspense finally relaxed a little. Over the past few months, the Silver Hand and Azure Emblem's overwhelming publicity had made Ouyang Shuo's legendary deeds widely known. He was eulogized by the citizens of various countries. Rising from humble beginnings, devoting himself to inheriting the Chinese civilization and unifying China. One legendary event after another gave the players reason to believe that Ouyang Shuo and his team would create new miracles on Planet Hope. They would overcome difficulties and establish new unparalleled achievements. Ouyang Shuo's global prestige reached its peak. Back in the royal study, Ouyang Shuo still could not hide the excitement on his face. Ouyang Shuo was excited not because of the recognition of the players, nor was it because he was about to head to Planet Hope, but because of the reward that Gaia had just given him. He never dreamed that other than the 10 spots of Homo sapiens, Gaia would also reward him with a permanent S-Class authority. This was a reward that could drive people crazy. After the disintegration of the Federation, there was not a single human with S-Class authority. The highest was A-Class. Even Ouyang Shuo had relied on the rich resources of Great Xia to materialize a batch of Homo sapiens. His achievement points had been reduced to 90 million points. He was still 10 million points away from the S-Class requirement of 100 million points. If there were no accidents, Ouyang Shuo will be the first player to be promoted to S-Class authority. The greater significance of Gaia's reward was that Ouyang Shuo no longer had any worries. In the future, no matter how he materialized or exchanged, even if he used up all his achievement points, he would still be able to maintain his S-Class authority. It was equivalent to saying that there was no problem of demotion. This was too important for the upcoming expedition. With 90 million achievement points, Ouyang Shuo could do many more things besides materializing another batch of Homo sapiens. This was probably Gaia's intention for this move. You're very thoughtful. Ouyang Shuo looked up at the sky and thought to himself. It could be said that Gaia had already given Ouyang Shuo the greatest help within the scope of her authority. What the future held depended on Ouyang Shuo. Under Ouyang Shuo's operation, the storm of Great Xia becoming an imperial dynasty quickly subsided. It did not cause too much of a stir. The focus of the world returned to the battlefield. On the 1st of April, Great Xia once again ignited global public opinion. Chapter 1347. The English Channel was a strait that separated the Gangder Empire from the European continent and connected the Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. It was 560 kilometers long, 240 kilometers wide, and only 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. In reality, The two countries had built an undersea tunnel at the narrowest point, calling it the European Tunnel. Because the English Channel was part of the North Atlantic and connected to the continental sea in Europe, it had been a strategic hub since ancient times. Many military conflicts and naval battles had occurred here in history. Two of the Ganger Empire's royal fleet's formations were stationed here. For the royal fleet, guarding the English Channel was equivalent to guarding the Ganger Empire's maritime lifeline, allowing them to advance and retreat as they pleased in European affairs. Due to the changes in the European war situation, the Ganger Empire had recently withdrawn the troops left in the European battlefield, making it their top priority to defend their homeland. At this time, the Royal Fleet's patrol of the English Channel was even tighter, but accidents still happened. On the morning of the 1st of April, the Great Xia's Atlantic Fleet, which had been completely replaced with ironclads, launched a surprise attack on the English Channel, starting a major naval battle. This was the first confrontation between the Atlantic Fleet and the Royal Fleet. In terms of military strength, naval warfare, and navigation, the two fleets were evenly matched. The commander of the Ganger Empire's Royal Fleet was also the famous naval General Narsen. They were basically evenly matched. The Atlantic Fleet's strength lay in its weapons and equipment. After the upgrade, the Atlantic Fleet had formed a three-dimensional space combat system of ironclads, fighters, and magic-powered submarines, already vaguely resembling the aircraft carrier fleet of the future. In comparison, due to the limitation of resources and labor, half of the Ganger Empire's warships were still sailing battleships, and not all of them had been replaced with the more advanced ironclads. This was understandable. Even with Great Xia's full-blown industrial strength, it had taken them almost a year to upgrade the Pacific Fleet. The Ganger Empire's progress was already quite impressive. In terms of weapons and equipment, the Atlantic Fleet had an overwhelming advantage. This was also one of the reasons why the Ganger Empire's Royal Fleet did not make any statements after Great Xia regained control of the Mediterranean Sea, because they did not have the confidence to intervene. The outcome of the naval battle was obvious. Faced with the Atlantic Fleet's surprise attack, although the Ganger Empire's Royal Fleet responded appropriately, and Narsen was also calm and commanding, they were still defeated after nearly 6 hours of fierce battle. The danger and excitement involved were not something that could be described with words. The defeat of the Royal Navy of Ganger was like a dazzling flare that swept across the night sky of Europe. It was bound to have an immeasurable impact on the situation in Europe, which was already surging with undercurrents. In fact, the repercussions were already brewing. That afternoon, under the cover of the Atlantic Fleet, Tseng Wuquan commanded the Spectre Army and landed on the coast of the Steel Tudor dynasty. The vanguard of the army was aimed at Castle Avik, the capital of the Steel Tudor dynasty. The 300,000-strong Spectre Army was fatal to the Steel Tudor Empire. Due to their weak population, the Ganger dynasty only had 400,000 soldiers at its peak. After the setback in Africa, the continuous depletion in the European battlefield, and the local resistance against the invasion of the Germanic dynasty, even though there were 2 conscriptions in the process, the real combat force was less than 250,000 people. As for the newly recruited soldiers, there was no need to mention them. What was even worse was that of the 250,000 soldiers of the Ganger dynasty, almost half, or 120,000 soldiers, were still on the battlefield in Europe, working on the European strategy of the Silver Hand. In other words, there were only a pitiful 130,000 soldiers left to defend the country. Even with the local garrison troops and the new soldiers, the total number of troops of the Ganger dynasty in the country could not reach 200,000. This was a very embarrassing number, and it completely exposed the Achilles heel of the Ganger dynasty. Although the 130,000 soldiers were well-equipped and well-trained, they could not encircle the invading Germanic army and deal with the invasion of the Great Xia army at the same time. A huge storm was sweeping toward the Ganger dynasty. The territory was small, and there was no strategic depth. The population was declining, and the country was isolated overseas. In this game world where there were no technical barriers, the Ganger dynasty could not even talk about replicating the glory of the Great Britain Empire in history. Whether or not they could keep their roots depended on the eyes of others. Otherwise, William would not have given up everything he had and supported the organization to attack the Germanic dynasty. Only by ensuring the peace of Europe could the Ganger dynasty be safe. Unfortunately, the weak Ganger dynasty could not control the situation of the war in Europe and could only sway with the wind. William probably did not know that the 120,000 soldiers he had left on the battlefield in Europe had already been secretly offered to the Germanic dynasty by Henry as a gift in the future. Sad. Under the investigation of the Black Snake Guards, the weakness of the Ganger dynasty was naturally unreservedly exposed in front of Ouyang Shah. This was how the Forging Steel plan was born. The Ganger dynasty was the best stepping stone for Great Xia to influence the European continent. If they could capture the Ganger dynasty, the significance to Great Xia was definitely not just that they would have an additional overseas territory, but that it would have a greater strategic significance. First, with the Ganger dynasty as a stepping stone, Great Xia could control the English Channel and then the North Sea. In this way, the estuaries of the European dynasties would basically be controlled by Great Xia, and the Atlantic trade that they relied on for survival will be firmly locked by Great Xia without any room to move. Even the Dawson dynasty across the Atlantic Ocean would have to act according to Great Xia's wishes. The trade rules of the Atlantic Ocean would thus be rewritten and incorporated into Great Xia's code of conduct. Second, the Ganger dynasty could threaten the European continent at any time. Among the 5 continents, Great Xia's influence on the European continent was the weakest. With the Ganger dynasty, they could make up for this shortcoming and extend their tentacles into the 5 continents. The whole world was a game of chess. Ouyang Shah could not refuse such a temptation. The implementation of the steel forging plan had a major premise, and that was to not cause a backlash from the European dynasties. If the European dynasties opposed Great Xia's invasion of the Ganger dynasty together, then with the strength of the Ghost Army, it would be very difficult to conquer the Ganger dynasty in a short period of time. Even without the participation of the Germanic dynasty, if the 5 dynasties of the Silver Hand were still at their peak, Great Xia would not dare to attack the Ganger dynasty. That would incur public wrath. Right now, the Spanish dynasty had fallen, and the Gaul dynasty had betrayed them. This was the time when the Silver Hand was at its weakest on the European continent, and Great Xia had the opportunity to deliver a fatal blow. Any later would not do. If the Germanic dynasty was allowed to digest the Gaul dynasty and then launch a counterattack against the Romanov dynasty, would the greatly strengthened Germanic dynasty allow Great Xia to conquer Ganger? Perhaps the Ganger dynasty had long been seen by Manstein as something in the bag. It was precisely because of this that Ouyang Shah praised the intelligence work of the Black Snake Guards. It was precisely this crucial intelligence that allowed Great Xia to choose the most suitable time to deliver the most fatal blow. The victory of the Battle of Ganger was mainly due to intelligence. April 2nd, the Ganger dynasty, Castle Avic. In the study of the kingdom, the atmosphere was frighteningly heavy. It was as though the air had solidified, and it was suffocating. William, the king of Ganger, had an ashen face. He sat on the chair like a log, not moving at all. This was the demeanor of a person who had fallen into a desperate situation. This proved that William had no way out at this moment. On the day that the royal fleet had been defeated, William had requested to convene a meeting of the 5 countries and request reinforcements from the organization. William knew what the situation was. The Ganger dynasty did not have the ability to face this crisis alone. What made William feel awkward was that aside from the Dawson dynasty, no one else was willing to lend a helping hand. The Dawson dynasty was separated by an ocean. Even if Jack really had the heart to send an army, by the time they arrived, it would be too late. It would be of no help at all. What made William even angrier was that when William proposed to withdraw the troops from the European continent, Henry firmly opposed it. He claimed that the European battlefield was in a critical period and the troops could not be withdrawn at this time. My country is about to perish. Why should I care about the European battlefield? William, who had always considered himself a gentleman, cursed angrily in the meeting hall. Seeing this, Henry could only nod in agreement. But his eyes flashed, and it seemed that he did not mean what he said. In fact, after learning that the Great Xia had invaded the Gangder dynasty, Henry and Manstein were so angry that they wanted to curse. This pair of schemers had never thought that just as they were about to reap the fruits of their labor, such a change would occur. The invasion of the Great Xia had completely messed up their plans. Left with no choice, they could only speed up the pace of annexation. They would first take down the Gangder army and the Spanish army, and then talk about counterattacking the Romanov dynasty. Otherwise, it was very likely that they would lose everything. As for the Gangder dynasty, they could only let go and let the Great Xia take advantage of them. William's heart was completely cold. Early this morning, William tried to contact the commander of the European army and give the order to withdraw. What shocked William was that the communication compass did not connect. Clearly, something big had happened. Next, William tried to contact a few generals in the army, but without exception, he could not reach them. William did not give up and tried to contact Henry, but Henry directly blacklisted him. It's over. No matter how stupid William was, he knew that it had to be the Gaul dynasty. But he did not know that just last night, the Gaul army suddenly surrounded the Gangder army camp, and when the opponent was defenseless, they disarmed the 120,000 Gangder soldiers and turned them into prisoners of war. The Spanish army was also disarmed. The European continent was ushering in an unprecedented change, and in this upheaval, the Gangder dynasty played the role of the weak, the role of a sacrificial pawn. Brother, you have to pull yourself together. Seeing this, Annie's face lost its usual vigor and was full of worry. Pull myself together? A self-deprecating smile appeared at the corner of William's mouth. It's already like this. How can I pull myself together? Let them be. William had already decided to admit defeat. Annie said anxiously, even if you can't win, you have to fight for the best result for the family. Don't let the Great Xia eat us up, not even leaving bones. Chapter 1348. What do you think we should do? William asked. Annie glanced at William and said carefully, I think you should admit defeat to Ouyang Shua in advance. William was silent, feeling very embarrassed. If we admit defeat now, we still have some bargaining power. Don't wait for the enemy to attack Castle Avic, then we will really be nothing. Although Annie could not bear to say it, she still had to make it clear. I heard that Great Xia treats lords who surrender very well. Even a sworn enemy like Xiongba can sit on the high position of Western Protector. Brother, you're not worse than them. Fine. William let out a deep sigh. I admit defeat. For Gangder, for the family, perhaps this is the best ending. We don't have to be afraid anymore. Brother, you have to hold on. Annie was a little worried. Gangder's defeat seemed to have drained William's spirit, and he no longer had the will to fight. William waved his hand, unwilling to continue the conversation. Seeing this, Annie could only retreat. April of the 10th year of Gaia was a turbulent period of time for the European continent. First, Great Xia ambushed the Gangder dynasty, followed by the news that the Gaul dynasty submitted to the Germanic dynasty, and at the same time took the opportunity to incorporate the Spanish and Gangder armies. On the 7th of April, there was news that the Gangder dynasty surrendered to Great Xia. Shocking news came one after another, and in the blink of an eye, the previously war-torn European continent underwent a major reshuffle, forming a new power structure. Not only that, on the 10th of April, the Germanic dynasty, who had just annexed the Gaul dynasty, immediately launched a counterattack against the invading Romanov dynasty, determined to recover their lost land. The Romanov dynasty was known for its fierceness, so how could they give up the meat that was already in their mouths? Of course, Pushkin was not a reckless person. He had also tried to negotiate with the Germanic dynasty, wanting to use the current front line as the border to redraw the border and coexist peacefully. How could King Manstein of the Germanic dynasty be willing? One must know that the Romanov dynasty occupied the most fertile land of the Germanic dynasty. Manstein threatened that the Romanov dynasty would only be willing to start peace talks if the Romanov dynasty returned all their territory. Such harsh conditions were also unacceptable to Pushkin. First, Pushkin was reluctant to do so. More importantly, once the Romanov dynasty retreated to their original borders, with the current strength of the Germanic dynasty, after recuperating, it was very likely that they would counterattack the Romanov dynasty. Pushkin valued the strategic security of St. Petersburg more than anything else. There was an irreconcilable conflict of interest between the two dynasties. Since they couldn't come to an agreement, they could only resolve it through war. On the other hand, the Caesar dynasty on the other side saw that the Gaul dynasty had surrendered to the enemy. The Ganger dynasty had been destroyed, and the Spanish dynasty had been destroyed. The Silver Hand's influence on the European continent had been cut off. With the destruction of the two dynasties, the strength of the Silver Hand in the world had also suffered a heavy setback. If the Persian Empire, which was in danger, was included, the Silver Hand had been reduced from 10 to 4 at its peak. Seeing that the situation was not good, Caesar withdrew his troops from the front line and stationed them at the border. From the looks of it, Caesar was not going to participate in the battle for the time being. He wanted to sit on a mountain and watch the tigers fight. He would place his bet on whichever side won. With the incident with the Gaul dynasty, Caesar didn't feel any pressure. Seeing that Caesar was so cowardly and didn't want to share the pressure for the Romanov dynasty, Pushkin was immediately enraged. He publicly accused Caesar of being a cowardly, selfish villain who had betrayed the organization. How could Caesar be so easily bullied? He immediately retaliated. The war of words between the two gradually spread from internal to public, and a big farce played out. In reality, the power of the Silver Hand in Europe had already fallen apart and could no longer form a united force. This made Jack, who was on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, extremely pained, but he couldn't do anything. Jack also had his own problems. After annexing the Gaul dynasty, the Germanic dynasty began to integrate the territories of the other dynasties in West Africa. They expelled the army of the Caesar dynasty and brought the whole of West Africa under the rule of the Germanic dynasty. In this way, the Germanic dynasty could unite with the Bantu dynasty in the south and form a pincer attack on the Central African region that was under the control of the Dawson dynasty. From the looks of it, the Azerbaijan was prepared to drive the Dawson dynasty out of the African continent. Presumably, after stabilizing the situation in Europe, the Azerbaijan's ambitions would also expand. They would no longer be satisfied with a nest on the European continent, and they wanted to conquer a new world in Africa. If they really conquered Central Africa, then they would be able to contend with the Great Xia's African protectorate. This was what Ouyang Shua didn't want to see. In this way, the African continent, which had been peaceful for a long time, was bound to become a new battlefield for the three major forces. But the situation of this struggle would not be limited to the open war, but more in the dark. The flames of war in Africa would most likely not be extinguished in a short period of time. April 15th, Jingshi. The Silver Hand suffered a heavy setback and was on the verge of disintegration, which made Ouyang Shua's mood very good. At the same time, the rise of the Azerbaijan adversity also made Ouyang Shua raise his vigilance. The global situation was far from the moment when it would be completely clear. What made Ouyang Shua feel gratified was that the Gaul dynasty's submission to the Germanic dynasty showed that in the face of survival, the restraint of the two major organizations on their members was not as strong as he had imagined. Everything was still based on strength. This provided the foundation for the Great Xia to completely eliminate the two major organizations in the future. This morning, the imperial court's plan to deal with the Ganger dynasty had been completely released and was waiting to be promulgated and implemented. The imperial court decided to establish the entire territory of the Ganger dynasty as Ganger province and appointed the former governor of the capital, as well as the veteran governor of the empire, Wang Shoren, as the governor of Ganger to guard this strategic point for the empire. Given that Ganger province was isolated overseas, it was not easy for the imperial court to manage it. The imperial court also decided to establish the Ganger Judici office above the Ganger governor's office and below the imperial court to represent the imperial court in the military and political affairs of the Ganger region. The Judici office, under the authorization of the imperial court, exercised limited military and political power. The difference was that the Ganger province's administrative center was located in Castle Avic, while the Jadushi office was located in the former capital of England, the Fog City. This arrangement also weakened the Jadushi office's ability to interfere with the governor's office. The former king of Ganger, William, had been entrusted with the heavy responsibility of becoming the first Ganger Jadushi. This arrangement was both compensation for William's voluntary surrender and a way to appease the people of Ganger. It was not an easy task to make the people of Ganger, especially the proud Ganger players, suddenly accept the rule of the Eastern Dynasty. It needed to be done step by step. If Ouyang Shua had not agreed to go to Planet Hope, the Ganger players would have already caused a ruckus. In addition to the internal arrangements, there were also military deployments. The Spectre Army, together with the surrendered Ganger troops, were reorganized into the Western European Army and temporarily placed under the jurisdiction of the Ganger Jadushi office. The remaining soldiers were not arranged to retire, but were temporarily placed in the reserves. The former commander of the Spectre Army, Tsengwu Quan, continued to be the commander of the Western European Army. William's sister, the former Ganger Princess Annie, was appointed as the commander of the Western European Army. In this way, the two most important people of the former Ganger dynasty were properly settled. After taking over the Ganger dynasty, Great Xia sent an envoy to the Germanic dynasty, asking them to return the 120,000 Ganger troops that they had detained. The reason given by Great Xia was also very sufficient. Since the Ganger dynasty had surrendered to Great Xia, then Great Xia naturally had the obligation to safely bring home the soldiers that had been detained without reason. The deadline is 1 month. If they are not returned, we will meet on the battlefield. Ouyang Shua's tone was very unyielding. This was done to win over the hearts of the people of Ganger. The people of Ganger had fragile hearts and had always played the role of the weak in Europe. The former king of Ganger, William, had never been tough in front of the European dynasties, which made the people of Ganger, especially the Ganger players, very sullen. Now, as soon as Great Xia took over Ganger, they put on a strong front and helped them vent their anger. Naturally, they could win over the hearts of the people and let them see the benefits of surrendering to Great Xia. Secondly, Ouyang Shua also wanted to take this opportunity to give the Germanic dynasty a good warning. Ouyang Shua vaguely realized that after annexing the Gaul dynasty, the Germanic dynasty had become a little cocky. They faintly considered themselves to be the leader of Europe, and even their attitude towards Great Xia was not as respectful as before. This was something that Ouyang Shua would not allow. Ouyang Shua wanted to use this to wake the Germanic dynasty up and see who was the boss. He had reason to believe that the current Germanic dynasty definitely did not have the guts to fall out with Great Xia. Not to mention anything else, once Great Xia cut off the sea trade routes of the Germanic dynasty, it would be enough to make the Germanic dynasty suffer. Therefore, the Germanic dynasty would have to return the 120,000 Ganger soldiers, even if they did not want to. Ouyang Shua really wanted to see what kind of expression Manstein, who was currently flushed with success, would have after seeing the Great Xia's diplomatic mission. It would definitely be very interesting. After the Germanic dynasty returned the detained Ganger soldiers, the global forces would have a new understanding of the situation in Europe, which would be very beneficial to Great Xia's hegemony. In addition to the army, the court also had arrangements for the Ganger royal fleet. In the great naval battle with the Atlantic fleet, only 2 formations of the royal fleet were defeated. The other 3 formations were still cruising in the North Sea at that time and did not have time to participate in the battle. Otherwise, the result of the naval battle might have been different. After the surrender of the Ganger dynasty, the royal fleet naturally faced the fate of reorganization. Ouyang Shua did not mistreat them. The edict reduced the Ganger royal fleet into 2 formations, eliminated all sail battleships, and equipped all of them with ironclad warships. At the same time, the name of the fleet was changed to the Mediterranean Fleet. As the name suggested, the Mediterranean Fleet would be responsible for cruising in the Mediterranean Sea to reduce the burden of the Atlantic Fleet and make up for this shortcoming. The Mediterranean Fleet belonged to the African Theater of Operations. The former commander of the Royal Fleet, Nelson, was also a famous admiral in British history. He was appointed as the Admiral of the Mediterranean Fleet. This was considered making the best use of his talents. Chapter 1349. On the 18th of April, Jingshi. This morning, Ouyang Shuo was receiving a special guest in the Imperial Garden. This person was the former Federation President, Old Chun, whom Ouyang Shuo had repeatedly invited. Unexpectedly, this time, Old Chun took the initiative to visit and unexpectedly expressed his willingness to become an official in Great Xia. "I didn't expect you to come," Ouyang Shuo said bluntly. Old Chun smiled and put down his teacup. "Since you took the initiative to explore the wastelands, of course, I, an old man, can't stay cooped up. I'll help as much as I can." It seemed that Ouyang Shuo's bravery had moved Old Chun. "You've been a great help," Ouyang Shuo said with a smile. Old Chun's political wisdom, understanding of the federal system, and connections were all very important supplements for the Great Xia dynasty. "You're very good." Old Chun seemed to be very emotional. He smiled bitterly and said, "People like us are always immersed in power struggles and chasing after benefits all our lives. We have no sense of mission at all. I'm very ashamed." This time, the silver hand and azure emblem worked together because of the difficulty of the internal election. No one was willing to be the first bird to stand out. This was the reason why Ouyang Shuo was able to soar into the world. Ouyang Shuo said modestly, "Compared to your contribution to the Federation, what I've done is nothing." Old Chun smiled and waved his hand. "I'm old, I don't deserve it." Having said that, Old Chun was still very satisfied to be acknowledged by Ouyang Shuo. This was because Ouyang Shuo's words carried a lot of weight. After the pleasantries, Ouyang Shuo got down to business and officially appointed Old Chun as a special advisor of the empire. A special advisor had no rank, no salary, and no right to participate in politics. He was purely a private advisor of the emperor to provide necessary consulting services. The only reward was a reward from the emperor. The two of them chatted for a long time before Old Chun took the letter of appointment and left. Looking at the back of the old man leaving, Ouyang Shuo seemed to be muttering to himself, "Do you really want to help, or do you think that Binger is still young and has a chance in the future?" It was no wonder that Ouyang Shuo was suspicious. Previously, Ouyang Shuo had sincerely invited Old Chun to become an official in Great Xia several times, but he didn't agree. Now, Old Chun took the initiative to join him for a ridiculous reason. Things were really abnormal. Old Chun was not a hothead who would regard Ouyang Shuo as a great hero of mankind. Furthermore, after Ouyang Shuo made the decision to head to the Hope Planet, there was an undercurrent quietly flowing in the Great Xia dynasty, causing Ouyang Shuo to be extremely vigilant. After all, Bing was still young, and she did not have enough prestige. She could not handle such a big crisis. Before leaving for Hope, Ouyang Shuo had to make sure everything was clean. "Keep an eye on him," Ouyang Shuo said to the air. Whoosh! A black shadow flashed in the distant flowering shrubs and chased after Old Chun. The vast imperial garden was once again silent. On the 20th of April, the Great Xia dynasty easily conquered the Gangder Empire, shattering the last hope of the Persian king. He finally decided not to resist and officially surrendered to the Great Xia dynasty. The Persian king also hoped to receive the same treatment as William. Ouyang Shuo agreed. At this moment, what Ouyang Shuo lacked the most was time. In a short span of 2 months, Ouyang Shuo had to prepare for the expedition to Hope Planet, decide on the main base for Great Xia's territory, and handle the handover issues. There were simply too many things to worry about. The earlier the Persian Empire surrendered, the more time Ouyang Shuo had won. From Great Xia's declaration of war to the Persian Empire surrender, only 1.5 months had passed. It was really shocking, and the European dynasties were so ashamed that they could not lift their heads. The Great Xia army was so terrifying. After conquering the Persian Empire, Great Xia's territory ushered in another great expansion, and its strength increased greatly. Its position as the hegemon of Asia was already unshakable. After the Persian Empire surrendered, Ouyang Shuo had already cast his gaze on the Arab Empire and asked the Chamberlain of Dependencies to issue an ultimatum to the Arab king. The Arab Empire was given 1 month to surrender, or the Great Xia army would dye Arabia red. This was definitely not an empty threat. After conquering the Persian Empire, the Great Xia army did not decrease. Instead, it increased. The Arab Empire was just trying to break a rock with an egg, and they would probably be badly beaten. Due to the Persian Empire's voluntary surrender, the Persian army was waiting to be reorganized. There were 2 million Persian soldiers waiting to be reorganized. Even if they replenished the losses and eliminated the unqualified soldiers, there were still 1 million soldiers waiting to be reorganized. Including the 4 armies in South Asia that had yet to be officially organized, there were a total of 2 million soldiers. This was really too terrifying. Not to mention sweeping through the Arabian Empire, they could even conquer the European continent. The only ally of the Arab Empire was the Caesar dynasty. The problem was that the Caesar dynasty could not wait to hide. How could they appear at this time and invite a rebuff? If the Arab Empire was really unwilling to surrender, Ouyang Shuo would naturally brandish the butcher's knife and send these 2 million soldiers to the Arab battlefield. It just so happened that a portion of them could be used up. If the 1 million Persian and Indian soldiers weren't handled well, it would be a huge hidden danger. There was a reason why Ouyang Shuo was anxious to conquer the Arab Empire. To Great Xia, conquering the Arab Empire had more strategic significance than practical significance. After conquering the Arab Empire, except for the Siberian region of the Romanov dynasty, the entire Asia would belong to Great Xia. That wasn't just an ordinary level of power. Just thinking about it made people excited. In addition, after conquering the Arab Empire, the African Protectorate would be connected to the empire's Asian territory. The Asian and African continents would become one. In the future, it would be very easy to open up a Silk Road. In addition, the integration of Asia and Africa would be very beneficial for the empire to strengthen its jurisdiction over Africa, strengthen its influence over the Mediterranean Sea, and strengthen its penetration into the European continent. Therefore, it was imperative to conquer the Arab Empire. April 25th, in Jingshi, the imperial court's plan to deal with the Persian Empire was released as quickly as possible. First, the Persian king was invited to take up a post in Jingshi. For this, the imperial court established a new organization, the Religious and Ethnic Affairs Committee. Like the Military Affairs Department and other organizations, it was directly under the leadership of the emperor. As the name suggested, this committee was mainly responsible for handling the religious and ethnic affairs of the empire. Great Xia was an empire with many ethnic groups, and its internal affairs were complicated. There were all kinds of religions, and they were restricted areas that needed to be handled carefully. A single mistake could cause a huge problem. As such, it wasn't hard to understand the weight of this committee in the imperial court. The former Persian king was the first chief of this committee. At the same time, the imperial court issued an edict to establish the Protectorate of West Asia, which would govern all the territories of the former Persian Empire. The former Northern Frontier Protector General, Siege Lion, was promoted to Protector General of West Asia. According to Ouyang Shuo's plan, other than the Persian Empire, the Arab Empire would also be included in the West Asia Protectorate. In other words, the West Asia Protectorate encompassed both West Asia and Central Asia. Central Asia meant the middle of Asia. The problem was that the center of Great Xia was in Huaxia. Therefore, Ouyang Shuo wouldn't establish a Central Asia Protectorate alone. It was natural to weaken the existence of Central Asia. After annexing Central Asia and West Asia, the position of the West Asia Protectorate became extremely important. It was the hub that connected Asia, Europe, and Africa. Its strategic value could be ranked in the top 3 among all the protectorates. Siege Lion's promotion to this position would allow him to stand shoulder to shoulder with Bai Hua, Molan Yu, and other overseas giants. The imperial court issued an edict to abolish the Protectorate of the West. The former Western Frontier Protector General, Xiongba, would be transferred to the Northern Frontier Protector General. This could be considered as taking over Siege Lion's position and guarding the northern frontier for the empire. Following the surrender of the Persian Empire, the Western Frontier Protectorate was no longer the empire's border. Coupled with the empire's governance of the 3 provinces in the Western Frontier, the situation at the Western Frontier had stabilized. Furthermore, with the improvement of the railway and highway networks, the transportation within the empire's borders became more convenient. The imperial court's control over the local areas was clearly strengthened. Due to this, Ouyang Shuo felt that it was more appropriate to take the opportunity to abolish the Western Frontier Protectorate and put the Western Frontier Province, Western Sea Province, and Western Kong Province under the direct jurisdiction of the imperial court. Expanding the area under direct jurisdiction would also serve as a check and balance for the border protectorates. Ouyang Shuo was unwilling to establish too many protectorates because he wanted to prevent the future nurturing of a border power to contend against the imperial court, especially when Ouyang Shuo was unable to preside over the imperial court. Strengthening the empire's centralization of power and establishing the imperial court's authority was an urgent matter. In the future, when the time was right, the Northern Frontier Protectorate would also be abolished. Most of the officials of the Western Frontier Protectorate would be transferred to the newly established Western Asia Protectorate. For example, Chief Scribe Fu Bai would still be the Chief Scribe of the Western Asia Protectorate. With this group of people, the Western Asia Protectorate would also be able to quickly operate and stabilize the empire's rule in Persia. Of course, in order to appease the old Persian factions, the Western Asia Protectorate would also arrange for some local Persian officials to take up their posts. According to the plan, the Western Asia Protectorate was prepared to establish 4 provinces. The 2 most important ones were the Persian Province and the Central Asia Province. Both of them were the former central regions of the Persian Empire. The former Hudong governor, Su Wei, will be transferred to the Persian governor, while the former northern Sichuan governor, Song Wan, would be transferred to the Central Asia Protectorate. The remaining 2 governors general would be selected from the old Persian officials. This was the same arrangement as the Southern Asia Protectorate. Ouyang Shuo would only arrange for trusted officials to guard the core provinces, while the border provinces would be handed over to local officials. It could be foreseen that dealing with the old Persian officials would be a very complicated task. The Vice Assistant Brigadier General Ko would go to Western Asia and stay there for a month to help the Western Asia Protectorate straighten out its human relations. In the future, the imperial court would also establish a mechanism for officials to communicate across protectorates. The purpose of the communication was to prevent the officials from forming alliances of interests because they had been working in the same place for a long time. Secondly, it was to make use of this opportunity to promote the cultural integration of the various ethnic groups in the empire. Only running water could surge forward. Chapter 1350. Ouyang Shuo had only hurriedly met with the cabinet to decide on the general framework of the West Asian Protectorate. The rest of the complicated matters would naturally be handled by the cabinet, so he had no time to attend to them. After the meeting with the cabinet, Ouyang Shuo was in the Privy Council again, presiding over the adjustment of the army. This was not an easy task. Just like the South Asian Theater of Operations, according to the early plan, the garrison of the West Asian Theater of Operations would be transferred from the abolished Western Border Protectorate District to the West Asian Protectorate District, responsible for the safety of West Asia. The newly established West Asian Protectorate was bordered to the north by the Caesar dynasty and to the northeast by the Romanov dynasty. It was a front line for Great Xia to attack or defend against the European continent. In terms of strategic location, it was truly extraordinary. Moreover, the internal situation in the West Asia Protectorate was complicated and there were many unstable factors. The West Asia Theater of Operations would definitely be overwhelmed by just 2 corps. In order to strengthen the deterrence of the West Asian Protectorate, Ouyang Shuo decided to form a regular army from the 4 armies of South Asia and name it the Central Asian Army. It would be responsible for guarding the Central Asian region. The commander of the 5th City Guard, Lin Yi, was promoted to the commander of the Central Asian Army. The defense of the 3 provinces of the Western Frontier was handed over to the Western Frontier Construction Corps and the Western Construction Corps. Ouyang Shuo also had a plan to deal with the 1 million Persian soldiers. First, he would disband 400,000 of them and demobilize them. They would be invested in local construction and provide young and strong labor force for various industries. This was also to win the hearts of the people. Not everyone wanted to join the army, especially in these chaotic times. No one could guarantee that they would be able to survive the hellish battlefield. Apart from the elite troops, ordinary soldiers were still very willing to retire. Ouyang Shuo's actions could be considered as conforming to the will of the people. Furthermore, the combat strength of the Persian army was limited. If they were to really reorganize them into a regular army, it would weaken the standard of the Great Xiao army. To put it bluntly, he didn't like it. The remaining 600,000 people would all be transferred to railway soldiers, and they would be responsible for the construction of the railway network within the empire. One of the remaining 3 armies in South Asia would also be selected to be a railway soldier. This newly established military branch of the empire had reached a massive scale of 850,000 soldiers. If the empire wanted to rule over the West Asia Protectorate and the Africa Protectorate on land, the key point was to build a railroad that traversed across the Asian and African continents as the lifeline of the empire's transportation. One could imagine how arduous and grand this would be. Once it was completed, it would surely leave its mark in history. Ouyang Shuo even said in a military conference, "In the industrial age, the responsibility and honor of building a railway is no less than going to the battlefield. This is a battle without smoke, but there are also deaths. To build a railway, one had to shed blood, brave wind and rain, cut through thistles and thorns, pave a way through mountains, and build bridges. One had to be prepared to shed blood and sacrifice at any time. It was truly a magnificent sight. This achievement was no less than winning an all-out war. Such an arduous task was most suitable for the railway soldiers who were trained as soldiers. In comparison, 850,000 railway soldiers were not a lot at all. If there was a chance in the future, Ouyang Shuo planned to continue expanding the size of the railway soldiers. This was the only way to accomplish such a huge matter in the shortest amount of time. Other than the Afro-Asian Railway, the railway network of the central hub of the Imperium and the various protectorates had to be expanded, too, until a complicated railway network covering all the major cities was formed. Railway construction would set off a wave in the next few years. For this reason, with Ouyang Shuo's approval, the Bureau of Military Affairs would establish a railway division in the capital. The first commander of the railway division would be Red Eagle, the commander of the 2nd Corps of the Stalwart Tiger Army. Red Eagle's identity as a mutant made it easier for him to command this special type of troops. It should be noted that although the railway soldiers had a scale of 850,000 people, which was comparable to a war zone, the railway division was only the size of the headquarters of a group army. The commander of the railway division was naturally on the same level as the commander of a group army. In the future, after the railway construction of the Imperium came to an end, these railway soldiers will be transferred to railway construction workers. In other words, the railway division was only a temporary product. Of course, during the period when it was performing its mission, its status was still very important. If Red Eagle completed this task well, his position in the Great Xia Army in the future would definitely not be lower than that of commander. Considering the professional requirements, the railway division would also recruit a group of technical personnel from the civilian population. All in all, this was a major event with great significance. April 28th. Upon receiving orders from the imperial court, the South Asian 1st and 2nd Corps began to gather at the border of the Arab Empire, preparing to put pressure on the Arab Empire with practical actions. When the Arab king received the news, he couldn't sleep at night and tossed and turned restlessly. The forced surrender of the Persian Empire was undoubtedly bad news for the Arab Empire. Even a powerful Persian Empire could only hold on for 1.5 months in the face of the Great Xiao army. If a war were to break out, how long could the Arab Empire last? If Great Xia cooperated with the African theater of operations, they could even launch a pincer attack from the east and west. The Arab Empire's army would definitely not be able to hold on for more than 2 months, or even less. If they couldn't win, they wouldn't be willing to surrender. The Arab king was very conflicted and was almost counting the days to live. The problem was that there was not much time left for him to be conflicted. Some people were conflicted, while others weren't conflicted. For example, King Manstein of the Germanic dynasty was very decisive. After receiving the request from Great Xia to return the 120,000 steel bell soldiers, he didn't struggle and agreed to it. Right now, it was a crucial period in the struggle between the Germanic dynasty and the Romanov dynasty. Manstein was really unwilling and didn't dare to become enemies with Great Xia at this time, so he could only obediently admit defeat. The advantage was that after sending away the 120,000 steel bell soldiers, Manstein got a promise from Great Xia not to take the initiative to use force against the Germanic dynasty. Of course, this promise was only limited to Gaia for 10 years. Even so, Manstein felt that it was worth it. This was Ouyang Shua's reward for Manstein's tactfulness. Anyway, Great Xia had no plans to attack Europe. Ouyang Shua knew that the European continent was like a hornet's nest that couldn't be easily poked. The European continent, which had a deep foundation, couldn't be conquered by force alone. When faced with external threats, these dynasties would quickly unite together and fight against the external threat. That wasn't the result that Ouyang Shua wanted. As for the Steel Bell dynasty, it had always been outside the European system, which gave Great Xia an opportunity to take advantage of. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy to get its way. Ouyang Shua had a clear understanding of this. The 120,000 Steel Bell soldiers that were redeemed, along with the remaining soldiers of the previously reorganized Western European Army, would be reorganized into the Northern European Army. As the name suggested, the future main battlefield of the Northern European Army would be in Northern Europe. The primary goal was to attack Iceland, Greenland, and other cold islands with the assistance of the Atlantic Fleet. These islands would be the bridgehead for the Empire to attack the Arctic Ocean in the future. In addition, the formation of a Northern European Army was also a realistic request to strengthen the military strength of the Steel Bell provincial governor's residence. Even with the backing of Great Xia, Ouyang Shua wasn't confident that a Western European army of 250,000 soldiers would be able to ensure that Gangdar province would be safe and sound. Who knew what the European dynasties would have in mind? Han Xinhu, the former commander of the 2nd Legion of the Yulin Royal Guards, was promoted to commander of the Northern European Army. Han Xinhu's vacant position as commander was taken over by the deputy commander, Sword Chi Lane. At this point, among the 5 commanders of the Yulin Royal Guards, 3 were mutants. Chapter 1351. In the blink of an eye, it was already May. There was only 1 month left before the interstellar fleet arrived on the resource planet. May 4th, the Imperial Palace of the capital. Midsummer was approaching, and the Imperial Garden was filled with lush greenery and fragrance. Occasionally, birds and beasts chirped, elks leaped, and koi fish swayed. It was like a picture of spring. It was intoxicating. The pavilion of return at the corner of Lake Tai was heavily guarded. The most distinguished emperor of the Great Xia dynasty, Ouyang Shua, was currently chatting happily with several ministers. Such a scene was truly rare. If the status of the ministers were outside, they would be the pillars of the empire. They were Bai Hua, the Protector General of the southern border, Feng Xiuhuang, the Protector General of South Asia, Sieging Lion, the Protector General of West Asia, Mulan Yu, the Protector General of Africa, and Swanee, the Protector General of America. These 5 people were the 5 Protector Generals of the borders of the empire, and they were also members of the Alliance of Mountains and Seas. They were old acquaintances of the emperor. Their friendship had lasted for 10 years. A week ago, all the high-ranking officials of the imperial court in the capital, the 6 garrison protectorates, a Jadushi, and the 22 provincial governors of the Huaxia region had all received an imperial edict to enter the capital to participate in the imperial court conference. in the army, except for the commanders of the 8 war zones and the commanders of the 3 fleets. They also received the decree to enter the capital. At this critical juncture, everyone knew that something big was about to happen when the emperor summoned all the ministers to the capital. Therefore, no one dared to be negligent. After arranging their work, they hurried to the capital. All the ministers of the empire gathered together. Before the court conference, Ouyang Shuo met with a group of ministers alone and gave them instructions, setting the tone for the most profound change that was about to happen in the Great Xia dynasty. The conversation with the 5 protector generals was the last and most crucial one. During these past few years, it wasn't just Ouyang Shuo who'd gotten married and established his own business. The Swanee and Siege Lion had gotten married and had children as well. Coupled with their relatives, numerous illustrious clans had faintly been formed around them. They were the rising stars in the circle of the empire, but they could not be ignored. Once Ouyang Shuo left, the attitude of these 5 people towards the empire would be crucial. It was related to whether the empire could maintain its current territory or even take another step forward. If they didn't cooperate, things would be a little difficult. In the returning pavilion, Ouyang Shuo, who was sitting in the seat of honor, put down the wine cup in his hand. They were afraid that His Majesty would misunderstand. Ouyang Shuo just smiled. No one could tell what he was thinking. Forget it. You guys should stay in the game world and guard the Xia Kingdom for me. The matter of Hope Planet doesn't require your help for the time being. Hearing this, some people secretly heaved a sigh of relief. There were also some who weren't convinced. I still insist on going. The one who spoke was Bai Hua, his expression stubborn. Ouyang Shuo's eyes flashed with a trace of warmth. He patiently said, "This time, the number of people going to Hope Planet should be small. Compared to Hope Planet, the game world needs your protection more. It was better not to cause too much of a commotion when establishing an outpost base." What outsiders didn't know was that after Hope City was destroyed by the beasts, the starship hovering in space had used satellites to track the Fire Dragon and the Titan Giants. The conclusion was that these top-notch beasts wouldn't move easily. If Hope City hadn't developed to the point where it threatened the survival of the beasts, it wouldn't have met with such an unexpected disaster. Keeping a low profile was Ouyang Shuo's basic strategy. Of course, the threat was always there. No matter how low-key they couldn't hide from this earth-shattering crisis. What had to be faced would eventually have to be faced. I can only be at ease with you guys around. Ouyang Shuo encouraged them. You guys can be considered Bing-er's elder brothers and sisters. Only if you guys assist her well will she be able to stand firm. Thank you for your trust, Your Majesty. Tao Wu and the others expressed their gratitude. Only Bai Hua remained stubborn. Seeing this, Ouyang Shuo sighed in his heart. How about this? I will set a deadline. 10 years. We used 10 years to build a super empire. I hope that you guys can also assist Bing-er for 10 years and manage the 5 protectorates well, so that they can be completely integrated with the empire's core. When the empire no longer needs to establish protectorates, it will be the day that you guys head to Hope Planet and assist me in expanding the territory of Hope Planet. How about it? Bai Hua and the others looked at each other and nodded solemnly. 10 years. It was a brand new cycle. Perhaps they wouldn't have thought that the 10-year pact set by the 6 of them would become the cornerstone of the stability and prosperity of Xia dynasty. It had resisted the storms that targeted the empire again and again. The historian Tang Pei wrote in the history of Xia, His Majesty's 10-year pact is more powerful than the authority to release troops with a cup of wine. It has created a brand new meritorious service allocation model. Thus, a new page was opened in the history of the empire. The next day, in the main hall of the palace, the sky had just brightened. The civil and military officials who were invited to attend the court meeting woke up early. They took a bath and changed their clothes. They were solemn, as if they were going to attend the sacrificial ceremony. In front of the square, the officials stood in 2s and 3s, chatting with each other while waiting for the palace gate to open. Tingyu, over here. Jiang Shang, the cabinet secretary, took the initiative to call Zhang Tingyu, the deputy minister of administration and chief of personnel administration, to his side for a talk. This scene was quite eye-catching. The court officialdom had a strict order and hierarchy. Officials of different ranks would rarely be in the same circle. For example, the officials seemed to be in twos and threes, and their positions seemed to be very messy, but in fact they were orderly. Apart from the civil and military officials, the group of civil officials consisted of the 6 inner pavilion elders, the other officials from the capital, the 6 protectorates, and the provincial governors. There were also officials from the capital who stood together with familiar governors. That was also equal in status. Basically, they would not jump out of this general framework. Although Zhang Tingyu was a second-rank official, the significance of being called over by the cabinet secretary for a talk was not ordinary. For a moment, many pairs of eyes were faintly looking in Zhang Tingyu's direction. Some seemed to be chatting, but in fact, they had been paying attention from the corner of their eyes. Because at this particular point in time, any trace of abnormality could contain a great deal of information. As important officials of the empire, how could they be indifferent? A trace of thought flashed in the eyes of some officials. Obviously, they had some guesses. They remembered that in addition to the position of Deputy Minister of Administration, Zhang Tingyu also held the position of Grand Tutor of King Chu. When it was almost certain that King Chu would become the regent, Zhang Tingyu's status as Grand Tutor of King Chu would naturally rise. It was natural that he would be put in an important position. Thinking of this, some officials were extremely envious and regretted that they did not get this position. Speaking of which, who would have thought that the eldest princess, who was still ignorant of worldly affairs a few years ago, would suddenly rise and become the successor of the empire? Although he had become the focus of attention, Zhang Tingyu himself was calm and did not show any abnormality. He respectfully walked over and greeted the cabinet elders, neither servile nor overbearing. In history, Zhang Tingyu was also a person who had been in charge of the cabinet. How could he have stage fright? Just as it was bustling, the palace doors opened. The officials stopped chatting and orderly walked into the main hall, according to the order of civil to the left and military to the right, waiting for the court to begin. His Majesty has arrived. After another half an hour, Ouyang Shaw, wearing a crown and a dragon robe, slowly walked into the main hall under the call of the female officials and stood in front of the dragon throne. King Chu, Ouyang Bing, had been following behind Ouyang Shaw. There was no expression on her face. Only her fists hidden in her long sleeves showed her nervousness. Ouyang Bing was very clear about what today's court meeting meant to her. After entering the main hall, Ouyang Shaw stood beside the civil officials in front of Jiang Shang. This was not overstepping the rules. Although Jiang Shang was the cabinet first minister, Ouyang Bing was King Chu. She was also a first minister and was the eldest princess of the royal family. Naturally, her status was higher than Jiang Shang's. Chapter 1352. Greetings, Your Majesty. The officials bowed in unison. The court meeting was the highest standard in the empire and had the strictest etiquette. It was only held once a year. Every time it was held, it was to announce something of great importance to the empire. Thus, no one dared to be disrespectful in such an occasion. Once discovered by the officials of the imperial censorate, they would immediately be impeached. A light punishment would be a fine, while a heavy punishment would be demoted. Ouyang Shaw sat down on the throne after receiving the greetings. I have summoned all of you here today because I have something important to announce. What needed to be discussed, Ouyang Shaw had already discussed it with the ministers alone. The current imperial court meeting was just a formality. Ouyang Shaw did not say much and gestured for Bai Nanpu to summon them one by one. Bai Nanpu understood and stood on the right side. A female official followed behind him, holding a tray with a stack of imperial edicts on it. It was obvious that there was more than one edict to be announced. Bai Nanpu picked up the top scroll and slowly unfurled it. The king of Chu receives the edict. Hearing this, Binger slowly walked to the center and bowed respectfully. Ouyang Shaw gave her an encouraging gaze as he gazed at the woman who bowed slowly. His gaze was filled with anticipation, gratification, admonishment, and other complicated emotions. This was a historic moment for the empire. His Majesty the Emperor has decreed, I am about to go on a long journey. The empire cannot be without a ruler for a single day. While I am away, the King of Chu, Ouyang Bing, will act as regent. She will be in charge of the political affairs of the empire and inherit the legitimacy of the empire. After becoming regent, Binger would step down from all her previous duties. The only change was that she would still be the commander-in-chief of the Gyeonggi War Zone. She would be the first commander-in-chief of the Gyeonggi War Zone. Ouyang Shual would continue to be the honorary commander-in-chief of the Gyeonggi War Zone. This was the foundation to ensure that Binger could successfully become regent. After Binger left, Bai Nanpu continued to summon. Protector General of Africa, Mu Lanyue, received the edict. Mu Lanyue stepped forward. His Majesty the Emperor has decreed, Protector General of Africa, Mu Lanyue, a meritorious official of the empire, has been promoted to the title of Princess Hereditary. His Majesty the Emperor. After Bai Nanpu's announcement, there was a stir in the court. Before the court meeting, even Mu Lanyue herself did not know that His Majesty the Emperor would grant her the title of Duke and that it would be hereditary. The meaning behind it was simply too shocking. Before this, there were as many as 7 people in the Great Xia who held the title of king. However, there was only one person who held the title of king, and that was King Chu, Ouyang Bing. Without a doubt, Mu Lanyue was the first empress of the empire with a different surname. Seeing that Mu Lanyue was still in a daze, Ouyang Shuo smiled and said, Mu Lanqing, this is what you deserve. We have said before that the empire will not forget meritorious subjects. Accept the decree. Only then did Mu Lanyue step forward respectfully to accept the decree and express her thanks. Next, Bai Hua, Feng Xiuhuang, Siege Lion, and Swan and I were conferred the title of kings with different surnames. The title of duke was also the name of their previous territory. For example, Bai Hua was conferred the title of Duke Lingxi, or Lingxi King for short. According to the system, single-word titles like King Chu and King Qin were at the level of princes, while double-word titles like King Mulan and King Lingxi were at the level of princes. Even so, it was still a great favor from the emperor. This arrangement was both a way to rope in and comfort the 5 great protector generals, and also a reminder that they could not forget their roots, much less who it was that had raised them from lowly lords to their current high positions. The summons continued. Just as the outside world expected, Zhang Tingyu entered the cabinet and was promoted to the vice minister of the cabinet. Not only that, Zhang Tingyu took over the position of the second-ranked cabinet elder, Ko Zhuan. He was in charge of human resources, and his position was second only to the cabinet elder. Zhang Tingyu was previously in charge of the personnel bureau, so there were no obstacles for him to be in charge of human resources. Without a doubt, Zhang Tingyu was one of the ministers that Ouyang Shuo had selected. He was also the minister that Binger could rely on the most in the cabinet. Other than that, there were also a series of changes in the cabinet. The cabinet elder, Jiang Shang, and the vice minister, Zhang Liang, retired one after another and no longer held any position in the imperial court. Obviously, the 2 of them would follow Ouyang Shuo to Planet Hope to develop the land. Ko Zhuan was promoted to the cabinet elder. The position of Zhang Liang as the cabinet elder was taken over by Old Chun, who had just been appointed as the empire's special advisor. No matter what Old Chin's intentions were, he would not be able to find out if he was not placed in an important position. There was also a practical reason for Old Chun to be in charge of the cabinet elder, which was that the grand scholar of the cabinet elder, Jia Su, had to retire and the cabinet elder, Zhu Shu, would be promoted to a grand scholar. In other words, the cabinet elder was going to undergo a major change. The principle that Ouyang Shuo set was that those who were selected to go to Planet Hope could no longer hold any position in the empire to prevent chaos between the 2 worlds. There was only one person who could affect the 2 worlds at the same time, and that was Ouyang Shuo himself. In the future, whenever Ouyang Shuo transferred a batch of talent from the game world to Planet Hope, the Xia Empire in the game world would have an empty quota to give the newcomers a chance to shine. This formed a positive interaction, and basically solved the problem of blocking the promotion channels for the officials. It was like killing two birds with one stone. To put it bluntly, the Xia Empire in the game world was the talent cultivation base for Planet Hope. Other than the cabinet, there were also a batch of officials who were removed from their positions and entered the list of people going to Planet Hope. The two most important ones were the Minister of Internal Affairs, Wei Yong, and the Minister of Finance, Fan Li. Their successors were the two deputy ministers, Di Renjia and Cui Yingyu. It was considered a smooth transition. As for the Minister of Administration, Xiao He, and the Minister of Military Affairs, Duru Hui, they continued to stay behind in Great Xia. The Planet Hope pioneering would probably be the same as the first year of Gaia. It would start from the lowest level of development, so there was naturally no need to transfer too many famous officials at once. Firstly, it would be a waste of talent. Secondly, famous officials might not be able to do the basic work well if they were squeezed together. Therefore, the main force of the pioneering team was still the basic officials who were in charge of specific matters. After numerous tests and layers of selection, those who were chosen were all loyal to the Empire and Ouyang Sha. They were also talented and could be molded. If not, Ouyang Shuo would not have spent so much money to conjure them one by one. Among the generals, Ouyang Shuo chose 2 out of the 8 war zone commanders to bring to Planet Hope. One was God of Slaughter, Bai Qi, and the other was a mortal soldier, Han Exine. The other 6 were temporarily left untouched. The position of commander of the African war zone, left behind by Bai Qi, was given to the commander of the covetous Wolf Army, West Garrison General Meng Tian. Meng Tian and Bai Qi were both from Qin, so they could be considered a kind of inheritance. Moreover, Meng Tian was a first-rate general, so he could also support the African war zone. The position of commander of the covetous Wolf Army was given to commander of the 4th Dragon Stallion Army, Luo Shixin. Luo Shixin had served in the Dragon Stallion Army for a long time and had received Bai Qi's teachings. It was the right time for him to lead the covetous Wolf Army. The position of commander of the American war zone left behind by Han Xin was given to Chaiji General Su De of the Imperial Forest Army. Su De was originally a divine general, so he had no problem controlling the American war zone. The position of commander of the Imperial Forest Army was given to Deputy Commander Xiesian. In addition to Bai Qi and Han Xin, Ouyang Shu also selected 4 top generals, collectively known as the 4 Ferocious, to go to Planet Hope. The reason was simple. They would be the backbone of the resistance against the top-class vicious beasts. The 4 Ferocious were commander of the South Asian Army Ran Min, commander of the Military Transport Division Eli, commander of the North American Army Xueren Gui, and commander of the North African Army Chang Yechin. Their vacancies were given to Wei Zhang, Lin Jing, Chao Hong, and Pei Xinjian. Chapter 1353. After so many twists and turns, Lin Jing still decided to leave the Royal Forest Guards and take charge of the martial arts department. Ouyang Shuo had his own reasons for making such an arrangement. Firstly, if Xiesian took charge of the Royal Forest Guards, Lin Jing would be seen as monopolizing the Royal Forest Guards. It would not be in line with the plans the court had for the Royal Forest Guards. Transferring Lin Jing away was the general trend. Secondly, the status of the expanded martial arts department had changed drastically. It was now a super organization of the empire that was responsible for the safety of the martial arts world. Lin Jing taking charge of the martial arts department was a great advantage for Binger. As for the other 3 generals who were promoted to commanders, it was considered a normal promotion. It was equivalent to opening up a channel for a commander to be promoted to a commander of an army. This gave the other generals hope. Other than the 6 generals, the first batch of troops was only 5,000 people. This included the 1,000 Shenwu Guards led by Su Chu and 2 independent brigades. The 1,000 Shenwu Guards were all cyborgs. They were the backbone of Ouyang Shuo's safety and also the backbone of the land clearing team. Just this alone cost Ouyang Shuo 50 million achievement points. The 2 independent brigades were led by Bai Qi and Han xin, respectively. They were of a high standard and could be considered the prototype of the future land-clearing army. In the independent brigades, only 100 officers were cyborgs. Two-thirds of the soldiers were combat robots, and one-third of them were combat players selected from the Royal Forest Guards. This ratio ensured the absolute loyalty of the army. Other than the civil officials and generals, Ouyang Shuo had also made meticulous arrangements for the intelligence system. Among the two intelligence chiefs, the Black Snake Guard's commander, Black Snake, would follow Ouyang Shuo to Planet Hope. When Ouyang Shuo was around, Black Snake would not dare to play tricks. However, without Ouyang Shuo, the Black Snake Guard was always active overseas. Ouyang Shuo was very worried if Bing would still be able to control this dangerous intelligence organization. Bringing Black Snake along was a necessary choice. Of course, the land clearing on Planet Hope also required a top intelligence specialist like Black Snake to collect information on Planet Hope. This was to prevent the same mistakes as Hope City. The Mountain Sea Guard's commander, Shunbu Hai, would also be transferred to the Black Snake Guard's commander. This arrangement was a form of mutual restriction. Chui Tianqi, the guardian of the Shadow Guards, was promoted to the commander of the Mountain Sea Guards. Chui Tianqi had been Bing's follower since she was young, and he was extremely loyal to Ouyang Shuo and his sister. With Chui Tianqi in charge of the Mountain Sea Guards, it was equivalent to giving Bing a protective talisman. In this way, the Imperial Cabinet, the Royal Forest Guards, the Martial Arts Department, and the Mountain Sea Guards all had people that Bing could rely on. This was basically the foundation for Bing to become the regent. Ouyang Shuo was still dissatisfied, and he wished for nothing more than to arrange things more appropriately. Even his wife, Song Jia, was a little jealous. Among the civil officials, Governor Tian Wenjing had once been the governor of Cheongzhou. He was one of Bing's old subordinates and had a history with Bing. He was one of Bing's assistants. Not only that, but Ouyang Shuo also took the opportunity to promote a group of officials from Cheongzhou as support. At this point, the great adjustment of the Xia Kingdom finally came to an end, and the court meeting also came to an end. Under the witness of a group of loyal ministers of the empire, Bing began to embark on the road of regent. A new page had been opened in the history of the Great Xia. On the afternoon of the 5th of May, in the Great Xia Kingdom Palace, Gaia appeared in Ouyang Shuo's imperial study again and asked directly, "Have you drafted the name list?" The name list that Gaia mentioned was the name list of the Great Xia people who were going to the Hope Planet. Other than the ministers, generals, low-level officials, and the army, there was also a special group of people in the pioneering team. They were all sorts of craftsmen and skilled people who had been selected from the Empire on a voluntary basis. The total number of people in this group was as high as 20,000. More than half of them were life profession players, and they were mainly Chinese. This made Ouyang Shuo very touched. This meant that in the face of great right and wrong, in the face of the survival of mankind, Ouyang Shuo was not the only one who could stand up. This included the combat professional players from the Royal Forest Guards. All of them were in high spirits. This kind of spirit that was not afraid of hardships and was willing to sacrifice itself was the foundation of the continuation of mankind. Done. Ouyang Shuo sent the name list directly to Gaia via email. In the entire game world, Ouyang Shuo was the only one who had a Gaia mailbox. In the next 2 days, I will transfer these people to the 2-star ships. When the time comes, you can go offline and familiarize yourself with the operation of the starship. I also have a big gift for you, Gaia instructed. Definitely. Ouyang Shuo was looking forward to the big gift that Gaia mentioned. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. During this period, the Arab Empire had not responded to the pressure on Great Xia. It was likely that they had not made a decision. Ouyang Shuo did not want to drag it on. He immediately ordered the South Asian First Army and Second Army to cross the border and officially declare war on the Arab Empire. It seemed that the matter could not be pushed forward without some bloodshed. If not for the fact that time was tight, Ouyang Shuo would not have wanted to go to war. However, there was no time to delay. He had to end the war quickly and unify Asia as soon as possible. Attacking the Arab Empire was also to strengthen the prestige of Great Xia. At the same time, Gaia was making rapid progress. The game capsules of the pioneering team had all been gathered on the two-star ships. They could leave the main force at any time and go on their own. On the starships, apart from the personnel, Gaia had also prepared a large number of resources, including engineering robots, reconnaissance satellites, drones, all kinds of nutrients, and even various vegetable seeds. Even the various livestock that they brought from Earth were sent to the starships. In short, Gaia had already provided all the resources that the pioneering team needed in the early stages. This was much more abundant than the resources provided by the feudal lords when they dared to establish villages in the game world. After all, reality was crueler than the game. Before the game capsules were transferred to the starships, Ouyang Shuo and his family specially went offline to have a small family gathering. Song Jia, Binger, Xie Lin Jing, Yuer, and Luoer were all present. It was also a way to send Ouyang Shuo off. That night, although his wife, Song Jia, forced a smile on her face, everyone could feel her reluctance and sadness. Binger was crying so hard that she did not look like the regent at all. Yuer and Luoer had just become sensible. Seeing their aunt crying, they also cried loudly. Even Lin Jing's eyes were filled with tears. The scene of that night was engraved in Ouyang Shuo's mind. He would never forget it. He did not know when he would be able to reunite with his family after this farewell. To put it bluntly, one mishap, and this farewell might be an eternal farewell. Life was unpredictable, fate was unpredictable, and creation was unpredictable. On the 8th of May, when Ouyang Shuo came out of the game capsule again, he was already on the starship named Great Xia. Gaia very carefully arranged a separate room for him. Ouyang Shuo could not wait to understand the starship. Chapter 1354. The Great Xia worship itself was a moving castle. It had a pier, conference room, dining hall, dormitory, recreation room, medical room, training room, warehouse, vegetable planting greenhouse, livestock breeding center, and other facilities. In the warehouse, there were all kinds of tools, energy, and other resources. It was basically self-sufficient. The starship was operated by artificial intelligence. Unless there was an emergency, it was usually unmanned. The gift from Gaia was the artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence in charge of operating the Great Xia warship was not ordinary. It was a secondary artificial intelligence separated from the Gaia mainframe. Its future development potential was not inferior to Gaia itself. Controlling the starship was only one of the most basic abilities of the artificial intelligence. Apart from that, it could also achieve a long-distance network connection with Gaia. This also meant that even if the pioneering team arrived on Hope Planet, they could continue to log into Earth only through this artificial intelligence. That was impressive. Previously, Ouyang Shuo was most worried about losing contact with the game world after arriving on Hope Planet and being forced to let Binger face all the challenges alone. That would be too difficult for Binger. Things were different now. In the future, although Ouyang Shuo would mainly focus on pioneering on Hope Planet, he only needed to log into the game occasionally and show his face in the capital, and it would be enough to intimidate the small fry. The last hidden danger of Great Xia had disappeared. Ouyang Shuo was extremely grateful for Gaia's gift and kept it in mind. This artificial intelligence was named Nuwa by Ouyang Shuo. In addition to the above functions, Nuwa would be Ouyang Shuo's most capable assistant in the future. Her importance was even greater than that of the ministers. With Nuwa's powerful storage, calculation, and data processing abilities, she could easily take over the public affairs of the forward operating base and recreate a Skynet system similar to Earth's. Just this alone could save a lot of manpower and resources. Not only that, Nuwa could also connect to Gaia's database and extract Great Xia's data at any time. She could then make a report for Ouyang Shuo to remotely control the operations of the Great Xia Empire. There are all sorts of things like this. 15th of May, Arab Empire. Compared to the strong Persian Empire, the Arab Empire's performance was even worse. Once the Great Xia army was deployed, the Arab king could not withstand it and surrendered in less than a week. The might of Great Xia was actually so terrifying. One of the important reasons was that Ouyang Shua announced the existence of Niuwa on the official website. This time, the whole world was in an uproar. The ordinary players were naturally happy for Ouyang Shua. At the very least, they could still keep abreast of the construction situation of the forward operating base through Niuwa, which was more or less a form of comfort. But for Jack and the other kings, it was a huge nightmare. What? Did we work for nothing? Jack was dumbfounded. He had never imagined that this would be the result after all this planning. With Niuwa's existence, Great Xia wouldn't suffer any losses if Ouyang Shua went to the Hope Planet. On the contrary, Ouyang Shua's expedition had greatly rallied the morale of the army and the people of the Grand Xia dynasty, and it allowed the commoners to walk closer to the center of the imperial court, causing them to feel honored. All along, Great Xia's rapid expansion had brought about a huge hidden danger, but it was gradually disappearing. Great Xia was bound to become even more powerful. What made Jack feel even worse was that Ouyang Shua had established an exploration team in such a short time and easily solved the problem of two teams, forming a positive interaction between reality and the game. This hurt Jack. If I had known this would happen, I might as well have taken the risk myself, Jack said in annoyance. Regarding this, Grandpa Jack had a deeper worry. I have a feeling that Gaia is behind this. I'm afraid we've all been fooled. Grandpa Jack's face revealed a rare, solemn expression. Not to mention anything else, Niuwa's existence was very unusual. Even if Grandpa Jack didn't understand artificial intelligence, he knew common sense. Separating a top-notch artificial intelligence like Niuwa would definitely be a huge loss to Gaia. When announcing the expedition list, Gaia didn't mention that there would be an additional reward like Niuwa. I'm afraid a huge disaster has already befallen the organization. Once Ouyang Shua succeeded in establishing a forward operating base on the Hope Planet and joined forces with Gaia, who was leading the development of resource planets, it was equivalent to dictating the fate of the entire human race. The leadership of the Hope Planet would be completely in Ouyang Shua's hands. In that case, the competition in the game world would become meaningless. No matter how much they struggled, it would ultimately be a gift to Great Xia. Back then, when Gaia announced the exploration of the Hope Planet, the Silver Hand had conducted a detailed discussion and concluded that the success rate was less than 30%. It was precisely because of this that they decided to join forces with the Azure Badge and push Ouyang Shua out as a scapegoat. However, Niuwa's appearance made the Silver Hand's argument no longer convincing. Who knew what other secret weapons Gaia had prepared for Ouyang Shua other than Niuwa? The expedition to the Hope Planet did not seem that dangerous. Dark clouds looming over us. Grandpa Jack's voice trembled. There had never been a moment when this old man felt so terrified. The problem was that they could no longer resist. Gaia had already stated clearly that the expedition fleet could only be arranged once. There were no extra quotas. Even if Jack wanted to step forward now, he did not have conditions. As for obstructing Ouyang Shua's expedition, that was even more of a daydream. I really didn't expect that I would be tricked by an artificial intelligence after scheming my entire life. Grandpa Jack's expression was extremely ugly. If that's the case, we can't continue fighting. A light flashed in Grandpa Jack's eyes. In fact, Grandpa Jack's speculations were mostly his own imagination. First, other than Niuwa, Gaia did not prepare any secret weapons for Ouyang Shua. There were no secret weapons to begin with. Not to mention the extra care. Even exchanging for supplies and materializing were done in a business-like manner. In order to gather the expedition team and supplies, Ouyang Shua had basically exchanged all of his personal achievement points. One had to know that it was more than 100 million achievement points. Gaia was still the impartial Gaia. At the same time, it also meant that the risk of the expedition to the Hope Planet was basically equivalent to the Silver Hand's argument. Ouyang Shua's expedition this time was to create a miracle. Second, it was not that the Silver Hand did not have the opportunity to establish a base on the Hope Planet in the future. According to the exchange rules set by Gaia between the forward operating base and the mother planet, once enough supplies were gathered, Gaia would throw out a new pioneering quota. After all, the more forward operating bases there were, the higher the chances of human survival. When it came to protecting the interests of humanity, Gaia would never be biased, nor would it be ambiguous. To put it bluntly, wanting to destroy the Silver Hand and the Azure Badge was Ouyang Shua's private matter and had nothing to do with Gaia. The battle for the future dominance of the Hope Planet was also an internal matter of humanity and had nothing to do with Gaia. Compared to this, Gaia was more concerned about how to turn the resource planet into a planet suitable for the Homo sapiens to live on, so as to prepare for the future separation of the two major populations. Therefore, Grandpa Jack's worries were unnecessary. It could be considered as worrying over nothing. The side effect was probably that after the Arab king came to a similar conclusion as Grandpa Jack, he no longer resisted fearlessly and chose to surrender. Chapter 1355. No matter how difficult it is, this matter must be done. Grandpa Jack was ready to go all out. He would not give up until there was a result. Grandpa Jack also believed that the others would not be willing to sit back and watch Great Xia dominate the world. As long as there was a common enemy, things would be much easier to handle. From that day onwards, the Silver Hand began to move quickly. Under the leadership of Grandpa Jack, a global conference was being prepared in full swing. If Ouyang Shua was present, he would probably smile bitterly. Grandpa Jack's speculations were mostly his personal imagination, which was very different from the truth. First, apart from Yuhua, Gaia did not prepare any secret weapons for Ouyang Shua. There was no secret weapon to begin with. The appearance of Yuhua was an artificial intelligence separated from Gaia based on a rational judgment after assessing the risks of pioneering the land. Only then did Gaia reluctantly part with what it cherished. Not to mention the extra care, Gaia did it in a business-like manner for exchanging for supplies and materializing. In order to gather enough resources for the expedition team, Ouyang Shua had basically used up all of his achievement points. After all, that was more than 100 million achievement points. Gaia was still the fair Gaia. At the same time, it meant that the risk of going to Hope Star was basically equivalent to the Silver Hand's demonstration. Ouyang Shua was going to create a miracle. Moreover, Nuwa was not omnipotent. After all, she was only an auxiliary artificial intelligence. She was not even like Gaia, who could materialize as a Homo sapiens. So far, she had only appeared in a virtual image. Moreover, Nuwa's influence on the pioneering team was not necessarily positive. There were also negative effects. There were advantages and disadvantages to being able to continue logging into the game world. Not to mention the advantages, the obvious disadvantage was that it would distract the members of the pioneering team and make them unable to focus on the pioneering mission itself. The reunion of family in the game world was strength, but it was also a fetter. If it was not handled well, it was easy to get into trouble. Then there were those ministers who had been materialized. In Great Xia, they had already retired and were far away from the whirlpool of the imperial court of the Great Xia Empire. If they were isolated from the game world for a long time, their thoughts would fade. The replacement of old and new blood in Great Xia would not leave any hidden dangers. But if they were to appear in the game world at any time, who knew what would happen? For example, would there be people who could not give up the power in their hands after retiring and continue to exert influence on the imperial court of the Great Xia dynasty through their students and old acquaintances? There must be. It was human nature to be greedy for power. In the long run, it would inevitably form a very bad social atmosphere. The originally indestructible boundary between Hope Planet and Xia in the game world was bound to become blurred, making things that were originally simple become extremely complicated. The interests of the two worlds were intertwined through Nuwa, who was the link between them. This was something that Ouyang Shua did not wish to see. Based on this, the first order that Ouyang Shua issued after obtaining Nuwa's highest authority was to ask Nuwa to restrict the game's login rights for the pioneering team. According to Ouyang Shua's rule, The members of the team could log into the game world for 3 hours a day before they arrived at Hope Planet. After they reached Hope Planet, the time would be reduced to 1 hour. In the future, it was even possible to further compress the login time, such as logging in once a week. This was equivalent to saying that logging into the game was just a home leave. Not only that, the words and actions of the pioneering team members in the game world would also be monitored in all aspects. Once they were found to have crossed the line, they would immediately be stripped of their rights to enter the game world. It was not that Ouyang Shuo was heartless, but it was necessary to do so in order for the pioneering team to be focused. This pioneering mission was fraught with danger, and there was no room for any mistakes. If Ouyang Shuo was not ruthless and tough, it would ultimately harm the entire team. I believe that everyone can understand. Secondly, it was not that the Silver Hand would not have the opportunity to establish a base on Hope Planet in the future. According to the exchange rules set by Gaia between the forward operating base and the mother planet, once the forward operating base had gathered enough biological resources for the mother planet, Gaia would throw out a new pioneering quota. After all, the more forward operating bases there were, the higher the chances of human survival. When it came to protecting the interests of humans, Gaia would never be biased, nor would it be ambiguous. To put it bluntly, wanting to destroy the Silver Hand and the Azure Badge was Ouyang Shuo's personal matter and had nothing to do with Gaia. The battle for the future dominance of Hope Planet was also an internal matter of humans and had nothing to do with Gaia. Compared to this, Gaia was more concerned about how to make the resource planet into a planet suitable for the Homo sapiens to live on, so as to make early preparations for the separation of the two races in the future. Therefore, Grandpa Jack's worries were unnecessary. It could be considered as worrying over nothing. The side effect of this was probably that the Arab king would come to a similar conclusion as Grandpa Jack and no longer put up a fearless resistance. He would simply choose to surrender. From the Arab king's point of view, since the world was destined to be unified in the future and be under the governance of Great Xia, then what was the point of struggling? The earlier they submitted, the earlier they could profit. Anyway, after the Persian Empire was conquered by Great Xia, the Arab Empire's geographical security became terrible. Even if they continued to resist, it would only be futile. Especially in the fight for the Persian Gulf, the Arab Empire could not compete with Great Xia. Without the Persian Gulf, even if the Arab Empire was not conquered by Great Xia, it would be like a fish out of water. It would be difficult for it to even be self-sufficient, and it was destined to be unable to stir up any big waves. Rather than struggling bitterly, it was better to obediently offer up the city in exchange for a good ending. It had to be said that this was a wise choice. At this juncture, in order to achieve a greater strategic intention, Ouyang Shuo would definitely confer titles on the Arab king to achieve the goal of winning the hearts of the people. Following the Arab Empire's surrender, Great Xia was only left with the Siberian region to unify Asia. 18th of May, Jingshi. As the expedition was imminent, Ouyang Shuo took advantage of the last bit of time he had left to cut the Gordian knot and quickly finalize a plan to deal with the Arab Empire. The entire Arab Empire was divided into 3 major provinces and incorporated into the West Asian Protectorate. One of the core provinces was directly named the Arab Province, and the former Arab king would become the province's governor. This was considered a reward for the Arab Empire's voluntary surrender. As for the remaining 2 provinces, one of them would be a local minister of the Arab Empire, while the other would be a county governor of Great Xia. Most of the former Arab Empire's ministers would be placed in important positions. By doing this, Ouyang Shuo naturally wanted to appease the people in the shortest time possible and stabilize the situation in West Asia. Of course, the treatment of the Arab Empire's army was not as gentle. Chapter 1356. The Arab Empire claimed to have 5 million soldiers. Of course, this was just a number. According to the information given by the front line, the Arab Empire was not only poorly equipped, but also lacked training, discipline, and combat experience. It was truly a weak force. Ouyang Sho ordered to lay off 500,000 soldiers and arrange for them to retire to fill the labor gap in the Arab region. Another 500,000 soldiers were transferred to the railway system to assist in the construction of the empire's railways. The 500,000 soldiers who were the best at fighting were temporarily reorganized into the West Asian First Army and Second Army. The whole process was estimated to last 1 to 2 months. At the same time, after the West Asian Army entered the Arab Empire, the South Asian First Army and Second Army would withdraw from the Arab Empire. The new garrison was chosen at the border of the Kaiser dynasty. In total, Great Xia's garrisons in West Asia consisted of 3 regular army groups and 4 temporary army groups, totaling up to 1.75 million soldiers. This was a rather astonishing military force. If the Great Xia really wanted to attack the Kaiser dynasty at all costs, the Kaiser dynasty would definitely not be able to withstand it. The situation in Europe seemed to have become delicate. The Arab Empire's surrender to the Great Xia caused a violent shock in the global situation. On a global scale, an unprecedented reshuffle suddenly took place. On the 16th of May, the day after the Arab Empire's surrender, the war between the Germanic dynasty and the Romanov dynasty immediately ceased. Both sides stated that they would peacefully resolve the border dispute through negotiations. Obviously, the big shots in Europe had already realized that compared to the internal competition, Great Xia was already a behemoth that was eyeing the European continent covetously. At this moment, if they still started an internal conflict, the Great Xia would probably laugh their heads off. The ceasefire was just the beginning of the internal integration of the European dynasties. In particular, the joint conference initiated by number 1 of the Silver Hand, Grandpa Jack, was a wake-up call for the dynasties. All parties with interest began to test each other and compromise. The strange thing was, for some reason, the joint conference did not reach any substantive cooperation framework. Both parties only expressed their concern. They did not follow number 1's proposal, which was to establish a global empire with the Dawson dynasty as the core to resist the continued expansion of the Great Xia. The Kaiser dynasty and the other kings were not fools. In the chaotic war in Europe that had lasted for 2 years, the Silver Hands camp had the upper hand in the beginning, but now they had suffered a crushing defeat. Of course, part of the reason was the intervention of the Xia kingdom, but the inaction of the Dawson dynasty could not be ignored. As the pillar of the Silver Hand, the Dawson dynasty, which was isolated outside of Asia, Europe, and Africa, had never provided any substantial help to the European battlefield from beginning to end. On the other hand, the Dawson dynasty had spared no expense in its efforts to unify North America. In Caesar's words, "The fact is in front of us." Compared to the overall interest of the organization, Dawson's own interest is obviously more important. In this sort of situation, if the Dawson dynasty were to stand out and advocate for establishing a global empire with the Dawson dynasty as the core, who would respond? No one was a fool. Only with effort will there be returns. The Dawson dynasty didn't have the proper responsibilities, but instead wanted to reap the most benefits. How is that possible? However, Manstein's proposal moved Caesar and Pushkin. After the conference, the 3 remaining kings of Europe met and held a secret conference to decide the future of Europe. The slogan they shouted was, "Europe, Europe for the Europeans." In other words, they would join forces and kick away the Dawson dynasty, which had lost all of its prestige, and start anew to create a brand new European continent. This was a very smart move. On the 20th of May in the 10th year of Gaia, a piece of news shocked the entire world. The Germanic dynasty, the Romanov dynasty, and the Caesar dynasty issued a joint declaration to combine the 3 dynasties and form a super dynasty, the Europa Empire. The king of the Germanic dynasty, Manstein, became the emperor of the Europa Empire. The 2 former kings, Caesar and Pushkin, became the 2 pillars of the empire with the title of prince. As soon as the Europa Empire was established, it became the 3rd dynasty in the world and dominated the European continent. Immediately after, on the 21st of May, the Banto dynasty in Africa announced that they were willing to submit to the Europa Empire. The former Banto king also became the third prince of the Europa Empire. Obviously, because it was established in a hurry, the internal interests had not been completely sorted out. The operating mechanism of the Europa Empire was very similar to the Great Zhou dynasty, which had already been destroyed. This was surprisingly in line with the historical bloodline of Europe. As such, the Europa Empire became a super empire that spanned across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Its overall strength surpassed that of the Dawson dynasty, and it became the second empire in the world, second only to the Grand Xia dynasty. Not only that, the new Europa Empire was a brand new dynasty that surpassed the boundaries of the Silver Hand and the Azure Emblem. It was a great fusion of the members of both parties. The traditional Silver Hand and the Azure Emblem were gradually withering and would eventually disappear. What replaced them was a brand new faction that used the dynasty as a module. The global power structure was undergoing a super reshuffle, and a brand new structure of one superpower and two powerhouses appeared. The Grand Xia Empire naturally dominated the world, and it was the true hegemon of the world. The Europa Empire and the Dawson dynasty dominated Europe and North America respectively. The Dark Knight Empire was content in a corner, and it no longer had the space to expand. As for the Indian Empire, under the current global situation, it could only struggle at death's door. Whether or not it could survive, or how long it could survive, depended entirely on the attitude of the Grand Xia. On a global scale, the only disputed territory seemed to be limited to the Central Africa region. The Grand Xia Empire, the Europa Empire, and the Dawson dynasty all had a lot of territory in Africa. The Congo region in Central Africa was also the only disputed territory, and it could be seen as a buffer zone for the three empires. The battles in the future would probably be even more unpredictable. In the blink of an eye, it was already June. On the 3rd of June, at around 10 in the morning, the interstellar fleet successfully reached the outer space of the resource planet. This also meant that it was time to bid farewell. Ouyang Shuo didn't make any emotional farewell speech, nor did he hold any grand farewell ceremony. At noon that day, he quietly commanded the Grand Xia and the Huaxia warships to leave the main fleet and head for an unknown journey. The two warships disappeared into the vast space under the gaze of the players all over the world. A new page in the history of mankind had been opened. After they set sail, the members of the expedition team, including Ouyang Shuo, rarely appeared in the game world. They spent all day on the starship, discussing and formulating specific plans for the expedition, no matter how big or small. After the expedition team set off, the game world seemed to become quiet, and there were no more waves. Of course, this was just an illusion. On the road to hegemony, there was no end to the struggle. Gaia Year 10, September. After 4 months of sorting out, the Grand Xia's reorganization of West Asia had officially come to an end. The wounds of the war had gradually been healed. With the influx of a large number of merchants, the West Asian Protectorate welcomed unprecedented prosperity. The exploitation of the oil and gas resources of the Persian Gulf had been included in the empire's plans. It would definitely become the new engine of the empire's industrialization, bringing the empire to a new height. After stabilizing West Asia, completely opening up the Asia-Europe-Africa route had been put on the empire's highest agenda. The empire would not hesitate to spend a huge amount of money and use 2 to 3 years to build this land transportation miracle project. The empire's 6 major fleets had all completed their equipment changes, and they firmly controlled the global sea control. The volume of maritime trade was breaking new records every day. With the Grand Xia dollar becoming the global currency, the Grand Xia was gradually playing the role of the global trade rule maker and the main engine of the global economy. Especially the Huaxia region, it was the global economic center. The Grand Xia Bank was steadily advancing towards its goal of becoming the World Bank. The coastal cities were advancing by leaps and bounds on the road of industrialization. Technology was changing with each passing day, and all kinds of products were constantly being produced. The Grand Xia Empire was transforming from an agricultural empire into an industrial empire. the Asia-Europe-Africa Railway was being built, and it was connecting the entire Asia-Europe continent into one, completely opening up the Silk Road. With this combination of land and sea, the distance between the empire's mainland and overseas would become shorter and shorter. In comparison, the Joseon dynasty, which monopolized North America, did not have the sea control of the previous life, nor did it have any overseas allies or key overseas territories. Even basic foreign trade had to be done by the Grand Xia. Because of this, the influence of the Joseon dynasty in the world was gradually waning. If this trend continued, there would be a day when the Joseon dynasty would walk the same path as the Dark Knight Empire, gradually being isolated and drifting away from the mainstream of the world. In the future, the Asia-Europe continent would be the center of the world. Under the global prosperity, the shadow of war still lingered. On September 1st, without any warning, the Grand Xia Empire suddenly declared war on the Europa Empire. When the news came out, the entire world was shocked. Once the world's #1 empire and #2 empire started a war, it would be tantamount to a world war. The ordinary people didn't know what to do and were deeply worried. The Grand Xia army was indeed on the move. Under the command of Li Mu, the Fengxiang army and the Northern Frontier Army of the Grand Xia brazenly crossed the northern border and killed their way into Siberia. In the Middle East, the 1st and 2nd armies of South Asia, the 1st and 2nd armies of West Asia, and even the Flying Bear Army of the West Asian Theater of Operations were moving toward the European border. From the looks of it, a huge storm was approaching the newly established Europa Empire. Not only that, on the African continent, the North African Army of the African Theater of Operations was constantly pressuring the West African region of the Europa Empire, assuming a posture of attack. In Europe, the Western European Army and the Northern European Army, under the command of Commander Ganger, were also actively preparing for war. On the sea, the Mediterranean Fleet and the Atlantic Fleet strengthened their patrols on key sea routes, intending to block the entire Europa Empire's estuary. The situation of war could be triggered at any moment. This made the new Europa Empire extremely nervous. After 4 months of running in, although the Europa Empire had passed the most dangerous running-in period, its internal affairs still hadn't been completely straightened out. After all, it was easier said than done to merge the two major factions. This was especially true for the Germanic commoners in the central region. The Spaniards, Gauls, Caesars, and the Romanovs were all their enemies, and they had a blood feud with them. It must be understood that the 2 years of war had caused the number of Germanic commoners to plummet by 20%. Faced with the all-out attack of the Grand Xia, the Europa Empire truly didn't have the confidence to declare war and drag the entire empire into the swamp of war. As for the Joseon dynasty, they couldn't wait to watch the show from the sidelines. The establishment of the Europa Empire was tantamount to completely excluding the Joseon dynasty from the European system. This hurt Jack greatly. He was even angrier than when the Grand Xia had suppressed him. At a time like this, it was already good enough that Jack didn't step on them. How could he extend a helping hand? Once the two empires engaged in an all-out war, it wouldn't be something that could be resolved in a day or two. If it was short, it would take 1 or 2 years. This was an excellent opportunity for the Joseon dynasty to once again rise to power. Jack couldn't understand why the Grand Xia would be so hot-headed as to suddenly declare war against the Europa Empire at a time like this. They're still young and impulsive. Jack couldn't help but look down on the regent of the Grand Xia. There was a rumor that the reason why the Grand Xia declared war against the Europa Empire at this time was the idea of the regent. The goal was to establish the authority of the Grand Xia through an epic battle. On the 5th of September, the panicking Europa Empire sent a delegation led by Prince Kaiser to the capital urgently in an attempt to mediate the conflict between the two sides. They were also worried that the regent of the Grand Xia was too young and rash to start an all-out war. Thus, the Europa Empire hoped to resolve the war through negotiation. At the beginning, the attitude of the Grand Xia was very unyielding. They showed that they would not negotiate and would only fight on the battlefield. This caused Kaiser and the others to feel uneasy in the Four Quarters Embassy in the capital. In order to resolve the conflict, Kaiser thought of a person. That was the former president of the Federation, the current Grand Xia Empire's handprint Grand Scholar, Elder Chun. He asked him to mediate on their behalf. Elder Chun was the core advisor of the regent, so he had a say in the matter. The sentimental Elder Chun couldn't bring himself to do it. Once again, he played the role of a lobbyist and finally convinced the regent of the Grand Xia Empire to reluctantly agree to start the negotiation. Even so, the Great Xia's side was still aggressive. Zhang Yi, the chief of the Chamberlain of Honglu, represented the imperial court and proposed two conditions for the Europa Empire's delegation to stop the war: ceding Siberia and West Africa. Upon hearing this, Kaiser frowned. Great Xia was really demanding an exorbitant price. In terms of territory, the two regions that Great Xia requested to cede occupied more than half of the territory of the Europa Empire. The area of Siberia alone was larger than the entire European continent. Of course, Siberia was sparsely populated, and its strategic value far exceeded its practical value. Something that couldn't be ignored was that the oil and gas resources in Siberia were the core engine that supported the industrialization of the Europa Empire. It was also the most difficult thing for the Europa Empire to give up. As for West Africa, it was an important support node for the Europa Empire in Africa. Once West Africa was ceded, the influence of the Europa Empire in Africa would definitely plummet, and Great Xia would become the dominant power. In the future, even South Africa would be lost. In other words, no matter which region, there was no reason for the Europa Empire to cede. Kaiser, who couldn't make the decision, could only consult the empire. In the following week, the delegations from both sides began to carry out arduous negotiations. On the other hand, the Great Xia army didn't stop their attack and was aggressive on the battlefield. In North Asia, the Fengxiang army advanced all the way to the Ural Mountains. The Ural Mountains were the dividing line between Asia and Europe, between the Eastern European plain and the Siberian plain. The Fengxiang army's intention to advance into the Ural Mountains and cut off the Siberian region was very obvious. On the contrary, due to the previous war in Europe, in order to attack the Germanic dynasty during the Romanov dynasty, the Romanov army was concentrated on the Eastern European plain, and the garrison in Siberia was almost zero. The sporadic garrison was only left after the map returned to zero. Before this, Siberia, which was 10 times the size of Siberia, was a big problem, not to mention the garrison. This gave the Great Xia army an opportunity. The advance of the Great Xia army caused the Europa Empire to fall into a more passive position. On the 15th of September, the First and Second Army of Great Xia in South Asia advanced into the former territory of the Kaiser dynasty and directly attacked the hinterland of the Europa Empire. The First and Second Army of West Asia were also gearing up for battle at the border. Looking at the situation, Great Xia wouldn't give up until they achieved their goal. For a moment, the Europa Empire was in an unprecedented crisis. At the critical juncture, after a comprehensive assessment of the war, the Europa Empire finally compromised and was willing to cede the Siberian region in exchange for long-term peace. Manstein also had discerning eyes. He knew the real purpose of Great Xia, which was to take over the Siberian region and truly achieve the unification of Asia. As for the West African region, it was just an accessory added by Great Xia to increase their bargaining chips. If Great Xia was really interested in West Africa, they could have taken advantage of the chaos in Europe last year to send troops to take over the region. Why would they wait until now? Sure enough, Great Xia agreed to the conditions of the Europa Empire. On the 1st of October, both sides officially signed the Ural Treaty. The Europa Empire ceded the entire Siberian region in exchange for Great Xia's promise not to use force against the Europa Empire within 5 years. The moment the treaty came into effect, it meant that Asia, Europe, and Africa would welcome a long period of peace. In the next 5 years, economic cooperation and cultural exchanges would replace war and become the mainstream of Asia, Europe, and Africa, and even the entire game world. The peace that people all over the world had been looking forward to had finally arrived. As long as Great Xia and the Europa Empire maintained their composure and didn't initiate a war, the Dawson Dynasty, the Dark Knight Empire, and the Indian Empire wouldn't be able to do anything. Jack, who received the news, was extremely disappointed. Only then did he realize that he had underestimated the Prince Regent of Great Xia. From the beginning to the end, Great Xia's performance was to take over Siberia and unify Asia. They had no intention of starting an all-out war, which made Jack happy. The compromise and interaction between the Europa Empire and the Great Xia Empire made it clear that the global dominance was firmly held in the hands of the two empires. The trend of marginalization of the Dawson Dynasty became increasingly clear. Jack was only disappointed, but there was someone who felt fear from the bottom of his heart. That person was the king of the Dark Knight Empire, Keisuke Honda. On the day after learning that the Ural Treaty was signed, he sent a delegation to Great Xia. Keisuke Honda expressed that the Dark Knight Empire was willing to maintain eternal friendship with Great Xia, and at the same time, obediently offered up the Hawaiian Islands that they had seized previously to show their sincerity. Thus, the Hawaiian county returned to the embrace of Great Xia in such a dramatic manner. On October 5th, the Prince Regent of Great Xia issued a series of decrees, making arrangements for the Siberian region. The decree established the entire Siberian region as the North Asia Protectorate, which consisted of the Siberian Province, the Central Siberian Province, and the East-West Siberian Province. The Northern Protectorate was abolished, and the Northern Plains Province and the Liaojin Province were placed under the direct jurisdiction of the Imperial Court. All the relevant personnel of the Northern Protectorate were transferred to the North Asia Protectorate. The former Northern Protectorate Xiong Ba continued to serve as the North Asia Protectorate. The former chief historian of the Northern Protectorate, Wei Liao, also continued to serve as the chief historian of the North Asia Protectorate. The North Asia War Zone was naturally transferred to the North Asia Protectorate. At the same time, the Privy Council also drew up a disarmament plan. In the next 2 years, according to the development of the situation, the two armies of South Asia and West Asia would be gradually eliminated or transferred. Of course, disarmament was one thing, but Great Xia would never slack off in the management of the reserve forces. With the military foundation of Great Xia, if a world war were to break out, they could recruit more than 5 million reserve forces with combat experience in a short period of time. This was also one of the foundations to maintain the rule of Great Xia. With the rapid advancement of industrialization, the upgrading of weapons and equipment was also changing with each passing day. The birth of new types of weapons meant that the form of war was gradually changing. The number of troops would no longer be the main factor in determining military strength. Of course, this was something to be discussed later. The significance of conquering the Siberian region to Great Xia was not only to unify Asia geographically, nor was it to gain a vast overseas territory. The greater significance was to obtain another source of oil and gas resources. At this point, more than 70% of the world's oil and gas resources were in the hands of Great Xia, and Great Xia was given the right to set the price of oil and gas. It also added another important bargaining chip to the globalization of the Great Xia dollar. With the advancement of globalization, in the future, the Great Xia dollar would gradually be separated from gold and linked to oil, which was known as black gold. On this point, Great Xia had already completed its strategic deployment in advance. In addition, the establishment of the Northia Protectorate was equivalent to removing another hidden danger at the border of Great Xia. With the Ural Mountains as a natural stronghold in the north, Great Xia could basically sit back and relax. Another point was that after conquering the Siberian region, the Great Xia Navy could also take advantage of the opportunity to control the Bering Strait, and then enter the Arctic Ocean to further strengthen its control over the sea. In the future, Great Xia was also preparing to establish the Arctic Ocean Fleet to strengthen its control over the Arctic Ocean. Through the Arctic Ocean, Great Xia could also form a connection with the Gangdar Regional Commander's Office. From a geographical point of view, it would form a huge encirclement around the European Empire. The strategic significance was extraordinary. If one thought further, after controlling the Siberian region, it would provide a possibility for Great Xia to attack North America by land, such as the Alaska region. In this way, together with the American Protectorate, Great Xia could carry out a pincer attack on the Dawson dynasty from the north and the south. All in all, although the current development value of the land in the Siberian region wasn't great, it made up for the weakest link in Great Xia's global strategy, forming a perfect closure for Great Xia's global map. It also made Great Xia's position as the world's hegemon unbreakable. Hence, it was not difficult to understand why Great Xia did not hesitate to launch an all-out war and forcibly tear Siberia from the hands of the European Empire. This strategic arrangement had long been finalized during the military conference at the end of the 9th year of Gaia. Regent Bing executed this strategy very well. This made Ouyang Shua, who had been paying attention to this matter, extremely gratified. He felt that his efforts in cultivating Bangor over the past few years hadn't been in vain. After several years of cultivation, it had finally borne fruit. December 30th, 10th year of Gaia. In the universe, Great Xia's warship. On the trestle, Ouyang Shua sat on the captain's seat. The curved, transparent screen in front of him displayed the scenery of the starry sky at a glance. In the middle of the screen, a huge green planet came into view. It was Hope Planet, a superplanet with a forest coverage of more than 65%. After half a year of sailing, the expedition team had finally reached the outer space of Hope Planet and was about to begin a brand new expedition. When he thought of this, Ouyang Shua couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. The hot-bloodedness and passion for adventure that he had hidden in his heart were boiling once again. Looking at this fascinating planet, Ouyang Shua couldn't help but feel a desire to conquer it from the bottom of his heart. The lofty aspirations and lofty sentiments of the past were ignited once again. The dazzling light spots in the starry sky evoked the deepest memories in Ouyang Shua's heart. At this moment, Ouyang Shua thought of many things. There were the ups and downs of his adventuring life in his previous life. There was the anger when he was betrayed by his elder brother. There was the shock and excitement when he was reborn. There was the fear and confusion when he established the Shanghai village. There were also the magnificent years of struggle for hegemony, the hot-blooded battles, the meticulous calculations and schemes, and the many times he led Great Xia from one peak to another. All of a sudden, all of these vanished into thin air. They were like dust that was gently brushed away from the bottom of Ouyang Shua's heart. The past couldn't be recalled. A hero doesn't boast about his past achievements. Looking at the dazzling and colorful Hope Planet, Ouyang Shua only hoped that this was a brand new beginning. Thinking of this, Ouyang Shua stood up and resolutely turned around. He looked at the group of civil and military officials standing behind him. Jiang Shang, Zhang Liang, Wei Yang, Fan Li, Jia Su, Black Snake Bai Qi, Han Exen, Old K, Eli, Schwerge, and Chang Yechen were all there. In the game world, they had followed Ouyang Shua and worked hard together to achieve unparalleled merits. Great Xia had also stood at the peak of the world. Now, they had abandoned everything in the game world and started from the beginning. They had once again followed Ouyang Shua and prepared to embark on an even more dangerous and magnificent epic journey. The ruler and his officials were already connected by blood. The lofty sentiments in Ouyang Shua's heart rose to the peak. His entire spirit, energy, and spirit were emitting a sharp change. His eyes swept across the group of officials and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, are you willing to follow me to conquer the world again?" Seeing this, Jiang Shang and the others knelt on one knee and swore in unison with a firm gaze. "We pledge our lives to follow your majesty." In a book that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.